Okay, so welcome to the first episode of Contra Gentiles Season 3. How are you? We should explain your
my wonderful voice.
Your smoky voice.
Yeah. No, I'm just sick. That's about it. Yeah.
Yes.
So people have to bear with a nasally voice and probably a few coughs and blowing of nose. But yeah.
Okay, blowing of nose. Okay. So the last episode we released was on January 4th, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a month. Oh, it'll be a month. I think it'll be a month that nothing's been released. But we have not recorded since December 20th.
Yes.
So we are, I'm feeling a little interesting about it. I think it's cool. It's good to be back.
Yes.
It's fun to...
It was a good break, I think.
It was,
Yeah.
but I think a week or two before we were planning to record today, it was kind of a feeling of like, oh my God, it's been too long.
Right.
No one will remember who we are. It's over.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
Momentum gone. But I think today will be good.
Yeah.
Do you want to, should I introduce our, the wine?
Yeah.
We'll do that. Okay. Today, this is a really, really busy label. It's a Hedges Family Estate Red Mountain. It's just like it says red wine. It doesn't even say red blend. Oak. We gives you an oak profile. So it's a Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Sozao, I've never heard of.
Wow.
A Touriga, and Tinta Cão, which would be a Portuguese.
So they just mix anything.
Literally, this is an incredible amount of wine.
Yeah.
It's half American oak and half French oak. It says degree days, average 3,000.
Shit.
This is like... It tells you how many are produced. I don't know. Whoa, this is a... Why do all of these wineries, vineyards that do stuff like this then use Comic Sans on their label? They all have Comic Sans on them. Anyway. We also broke all the wine glasses, so we're using little
chubs.
Little baby chubby ones. They're nice. Oh, it doesn't slide as much when they're full. Ooh, that's very fragrant.
Is it?
I can smell it from here. You can't smell anything, right?
I could. Yeah.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers. Wow.
What?
I don't know if it's because I'm sick or not, but that tasted a bit weird.
It tastes like all of the astringency of the wine I've ever had with none of the rest of it.
Yeah.
It's not in my mouth anymore at all.
Yeah,
Anyway,
me either. Yeah. It hits hard at first, but...
Okay. Anyway, so I don't think we have anything to say about hiatus or anything. We haven't done any. I mean, nothing's different.
No, not really.
I had COVID for 2 weeks. Should I talk about that?
Yeah.
Is that worth it?
Sure.
I did get COVID. The Wu flu. The Chinaman got me. I had to take 2 weeks off of work. Do you know how bad that sucks?
Yeah.
When they don't pay you to be gone because you're ill.
Yeah.
I lost so much money over 2 weeks.
So they didn't pay you during that time?
No.
You got wow. No sick pay? That's kind of fucked up.
No. I think if I was salary, they would,
Oh,
obviously,
okay.
but I'm not salary.
Yeah.
So I lost a lot of money. I had a fever of 102 for 4 days.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was 100 for days after that.
Yeah.
So I might have brain damage now. I don't know if it boils your brain or anything to be.
You're not a baby anymore. But
fever for that long. Yeah, that sucked ass.
Yeah.
I actually have my smell back. For now.
Good, yeah.
I don't know if it'll probably go away again, but I can taste again. I was really worried.
Yeah,
because it was gone for you. It was gone for you for a long time, altered at least for a year.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it sucked. Except for older people, it does last longer, like the missing taste and everything.
Oh, okay,
so
yeah.
If you're younger, you have the...
Yeah, I'm fine now.
I know. You got rejuvenating cells. Mine are just dying. I think it's like 32 or something, right? I can't remember the exact...
32 or 33.
Yeah,
that's what
the
Joe was
age.
saying.
Yeah.
Because Joe turns 33 in like a week.
Oh, is he? Yeah.
Next Friday.
Yeah.
February.
That's where all his overeating and sitting down is going to catch up onto his body.
Oh, I know. Wait, what day is that? Is that a recording day? 1 second. No, it's Sunday. It's just a week from Sunday.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is Aquinas feast day also.
It is, yes.
We do not have any feast prepared.
No, we don't.
We didn't know until 1 p.m. or something.
No, that's what I told you. I knew about it. I knew it was coming up, but... Yeah.
I didn't know that at all. I wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so today we are covering, or going to attempt to cover, this is a lot, Edward Feser's philosophy of mind.
Yes, yeah.
Because, here, talk about the pivot. I think you'd articulate it better.
Oh, yeah, and so, I mean, I think in the first 2 seasons, especially last season when we started to get more of a proper footing in how our show is going to be, because I think the first year was more like, we're
figuring it out.
Yeah, figuring out, discussing a lot of different things. We're out there next to the window and all that shit, so it was like...
Had Anne-Marie on board.
Yeah. But I think towards the end of the season 2, we started to have more exact topics with books and everything that we read. But I also did notice that throughout the time, it normally came back to metaphysics, and I think we've discussed it at length to the point that that it'll be more interesting to begin to speak of more of the manifestations of being, particularly like in this case it's going to be the mind. Other ones are going to be moral philosophy, other aspects will be like immateriality of the soul or of the mind or whatever. And so I think we could begin to discuss more particular things.
Particular topics of philosophy.
Of philosophy, yeah.
Epistemology is a big one that people are interested in.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because like if you ever look at like the Summa Theologica, the first book is essentially about metaphysics, about God and everything, but then like the rest of the 5 volumes is about the manifestations of that. Yeah, and there's just much more topics that comes about from it because it's. I think it's important to have a good grounding in what it means to be real, and I think we're still going to probably have to turn back to it because many times when we're going to be discussing different things, like if we have a whole episode on rather than just reading Foucault's or qualia on sexuality or madness or whatever, we could have a general discussion on sexuality itself, right? And so harking back to what is real, I think will be quite important for discussions like that. So, but yeah, I thought Feser's book and Philosophy of Mind, this one is just a good introduction to it. It kind of gives you an outline of all the theories that was really presented in the Western philosophical world from the beginning. Beginning at least of recorded Western philosophical writings. And it's a good scope. And it gives both of it like it's what it is and any complications that some of the theories have. And but that's about it.
Yeah, so I think this came out in 2005.
Yeah, something like that.
I do know that I listened to the audio version of it. Sorry, wine burp.
So it was a girl reading it, right?
It was an Australian woman.
Yeah.
But there is a section in that. I don't know when you would have read this, but there is a section in this version that was added a couple years later. That's a short addendum. Yeah. And not correction, but an expansion on certain things he said that he thought he should have.
Yeah, this one I read in 2014, so that's probably.
Oh, yes. You would have read that. It was called like Postscript or something.
Right,
chapter. But yes, it was an Australian woman, and I think my impression of audiobooks, or my sense of the audiobook industry, would be that they might benefit from teaching people how to pronounce words. When we did To Live, that guy was perfect because there really wasn't anything you wouldn't understand.
Yeah,
because it's just a novel. There's not like you're not talking about. It's like she kept saying theism and theistic.
Oh, really?
Which I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
Aristotelian. My favorite word from the whole thing is corollary. Is how she said corollary.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And of course she's Australian.
Yeah.
And like they're going to pronounce certain things differently, but it's not corollary in any dialect of English. And there's an incredible amount of words and they were not frequent, but it's dense enough that they would.
Yeah.
Aristotelian was really hard to hear, especially in that part, but which I think we should probably save till the end.
Yeah.
Because how this is set up, so he gives a little introduction is like, why discuss philosophy of mind? And it's essentially that to investigate philosophy of mind is pretty close to just investigating philosophy itself. It's one of the most basic.
It is,
disciplines in philosophy.
Yes.
What is?
It's so basic that traditionally, about this, I mean about the ancient world, you normally would learn more about this before you learn about metaphysics.
Which is the other way around now.
Yes. Even though metaphysics is what they call first philosophy, it's not what you first encounter. And so they normally taught the way you first encounter. You first encounter your mind.
Yes.
And so since you first encounter your mind, that is the first thing you should be able to talk about.
And that's, I think he does a very good job of... the first chapter after the introduction is on perception, which every single one of these chapters could be its own 3-hour episode.
Oh, of
so
course,
we're going to have to condense. This might go long.
Yeah.
Because my notes, just that I was jotting down in my phone, are 8 pages.
Yes, yeah. And this is a really dense academic book, and I think,
is.
And this is what's so different. And I think it's probably true for you as well, but it's definitely true for me, is that this is the difference between reading something that's more pop culture phenomena, like something like Paulia's book, as opposed to like a really
sexual
heavy
persona.
Yeah, like a really heavily researched academic writing. It's like it's so heady. It's so much.
Like he writes it pretty much as entertainingly as you could.
Right? Yes.
But like this is.
But it's information rich, and it's also just very argumentative rich. It's like you could actually pick things apart and see whether they follow rather than just have
this, therefore that, therefore
this,
therefore that, therefore this raises this
and
question.
So yes. So it's actually much more pleasant read because of that.
What I actually found interesting is I was having a hard time. Something about, so for fiction especially, audiobooks are fantastic.
Yeah.
Because it's a very passive listening experience.
Yes.
For something like this, it might actually, if you have issues concentrating when you do things, it might actually be better to read it.
Yes.
Because listening to it,
right.
I had to not do anything else.
Yes.
And I was like, well, I may as well just be reading it.
And that's what I was going to say. I think for writings like this, what normally works the best for me is both. It's like I have to listen to it and I follow along, and then I pause it so I could actually look at the argument.
Because there are just PDFs of this online.
I know,
like you can just find this free. Yeah.
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 That's awesome.
Yeah. Like Scribd has all the different book reading apps have it. If they have anything by Feser, it's this.
Yeah.
Because I think that was picked up by some group of people, like a philosophy publishing group that has it as part of their catalog.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, he's not the sexiest philosopher. Obviously, he's not like.
Well, he looks a little.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, he's normal. He's not.
Yes.
The thing about Paulia, she's like super well dressed. Foucault's super well dressed.
Yeah, that's what
like
I mean.
Feser's just like kind of normal looking.
He is, yeah.
As most actual philosophers.
Yes,
are.
Yeah. But I think there was this movement in the postmodern era, at least from like the 1950s all the way up through.
Well, they like instinctually understood aesthetics in a way that,
or they didn't, but they still stood out, like Chalmers. Did you ever see Chalmers? I gotta let me look it up for you, because he looks different now. He finally cut his hair and stuff, but he looked ridiculous.
Well, he's referenced in this a lot.
He's one of the main contemporary
philosophers of
for mind, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I want to see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Was it just kind of a little over the top? Is it David Chalmers?
Yeah.
He looks like you put a bandana on him and he's
yeah.
Foster Wallace.
He looks ridiculous. He's Australian.
Oh, gross.
And that's how most of the times, I mean, he just...
Sorry, not oh, gross. I love Australians, but there's something about the combination of what he looks like and the fact that he's Australian that makes it more
In recent times, he cut his hair. I think like in the last 5 years, he cut his hair and he looks a little bit different. But he still kind of wears that leather jacket and the tie-dye shirts and everything. He looks ridiculous.
Because what is it? Curtis Yarvin, he's one of the neo-reactionary guys, the NRX. Do you know who that is? Mm-hmm. He wears like leather jackets and has long hair. And he's cleaner looking than that.
Yeah.
That was a little...
And
so male equivalent of cat lady is what that was.
Yes, yeah. But people like that are more marketable, right? And so
because they have an
they have an aesthetic, right? Whatever it is, whether it's a nice aesthetic like Foucault that actually dressed nice and was a good-looking guy and everything, or Qualia, who when she was younger, she actually was quite attractive.
She was quite attractive, and she dressed well.
Yeah, she did. Yeah,
incredible fashion sense.
Even up to the 90s, she let her hair be gray, but it was a little bit longer, and she actually she was really attractive. I think her more boyish.
And even now that she's aged, she looks elegant.
She does. She's obviously I really don't like her hairstyle, though. That's the one thing.
It's like a lesbian punk rock kind of hairstyle thing.
Yeah.
Whatever. But like she whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyways, the marketable. He's not. He's
Feser is. His lectures are reading out loud.
Yes.
Which is, if you want to be correct, that's fine.
Yeah.
He's not super entertaining, but he's probably one of the better.
Yes.
Is he a Thomist, would he say?
Yes, yeah. He's constituted as what's called analytical Thomism. Okay. So like me, he majored in analytical philosophy for grad school, and that's where he got his master's and PhD and everything. Okay. And then he started to read Thomistic writings through the analytical
After
lens.
He got...
Yes, after.
Oh.
Yeah, he was atheist, and so even when he was
through
teaching...
Through his doctorate?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it wasn't until after he was teaching...
How old is he? 60s? 50s?
No, I think he's... Yeah, probably 50s, I think, yeah. Either
so
late 40s or
so
50s,
this might have been while that process was happening. No.
Kind of, yeah. I think the story he gives is that it started in the
late 90s.
Late 90s, and it was from a student. And so a student and so what happened with him is that like most contemporary philosophers, if you went to academia, they normally skip through
the medieval period,
and that's what happened to him. Yeah. And that was the same thing with me, but I was stubborn and I kind of read it and everything. But and that was mostly for Holy Rosary because they made me read it in Latin and everything. Yeah. But and so they skipped it, and so the way he normally taught anything about that time period was very brief and just kind of gave talking points, like most people give talking points. Like if you ever read like the God Delusion. Dawkins' attribution of Aquinas' arguments for the 5 ways to God is like ridiculously false and stupid. Yeah. And so that's how he mostly taught it.
Is that in the God Illusion?
Yeah.
Should we cover that?
Yeah.
Sometime?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Not right now, but in the next few episodes. But we'll cover it sometime.
And so, I mean, you're going to laugh, though. It's pretty bad. But anyways.
Well, we could just shit on Dawkins.
Yeah.
Make some clickbait. It'll be fine. It'll
that's
be fine.
True.
Anyway, sorry.
And so one of the students asked him, why was it that people believed this for so long if the arguments were this stupid? And
that's a really good question.
Yes. And so that's what startled him. He was like, well, maybe I should just read it at least. Maybe I should start investigating.
That's a really good.
Yeah. Because that's something that I think many people just pass on, because if you do take those classes, they normally just they do Greek and then they start beginning with Descartes.
Well, it really is almost like you can't really, in any honest way, discuss Augustine and Aquinas in the same sentence.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
They require separate discussions,
and
they try to do this.
Yeah. And there's so many. Peter Abelard, there's
Avicenna,
Al-Farabi, and so there's so many medieval thinkers that that he's starting to investigate more.
What constitutes the medieval era? It's pre-Renaissance.
Yes,
which would have been the 13.
I think it ends at 15. Normally the marker is 1500. 1500
So from when
is
to
the
when?
early modern period and the later Renaissance period.
So what would the beginning be?
After the fall of Rome.
Which was 400, 300?
Yeah, late 300s.
So this is the longest period of history.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. Yes, yeah, definitely.
As far as it's constituted as a single era.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Which should tell you something.
Yes, yeah. That nothing happened after Aristotle until Descartes. Is this the most ridiculous thing? And a student was able to spot that, and asking him that question just really made him think. And to his credit, he started to research it, and that's when he
was like, oh shit.
Yes, he was, oh shit, this actually makes sense. Yeah. Because if you are of analytical mind, if you are somebody who went through so much education with logic and reason, you cannot read Thomas Aquinas and
at least be impressed.
And not at least be impressed,
Yeah.
right? Yes. I mean, how articulate, how accurate, how quick to the point that he makes it. It's really unbelievable. There is no other writer like him.
Yeah.
That has really ever existed. And his genius goes, I mean, there's legends of how intelligent he was. Like he'll be writing 5 books at once, and he'll have scribes in which he will be walking around to one scribe, say something, goes to the other one and say something else.
Which is probably true.
Right, yes. And he just would not lose his train of thought.
It's very flamboyant of him.
Oh, I know, yes.
He'd be gay now, but...
Yeah, I could just imagine his personality, it would be quite beautiful. Yeah, and so
anyway.
So reading that, so I think it's what I really like about Feser, and I also think it's, if anybody,
because he is pretty to the point.
He is, yeah. He does.
He has a
similar
talent.
to that.
He has a talent for that.
Yes, and a lot of us who have been in analytical philosophy, you're trained that way. It's like you get docked points if there's any fluff. Like you begin, you do your thesis statement.
Like, bro, this isn't prose. Like,
yes, it's like no. It's like, well, what is this? And they would just cut it out. If you have an advisor, they just cross it out. No, I don't have this on here. Just go straight to the argument, and it's
describe nothing.
Yeah, sometimes it's like just make sure you're not writing for an idiot, and so they want you to already assume that they have some basic understanding of jargon.
Okay, so if we're gonna make this a listenable length, we got to start.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
We're already 25 minutes fucking in. We haven't even.
It's fine.
Okay. So,
but I think we should just start with a general description of the mind. In all honesty, because
but you don't want to do the book structure.
I do. I really do. But what I mean is that our general audience.
How about let's describe what the mind is insofar as we're investigating it.
Okay, yeah.
Why is this?
Yeah, why we need to investigate it, and also just at least put out there quickly, like the popular notion of what the mind is. That the everyday person that just goes to high school, maybe gets a bachelor's, but just at least gets a high school diploma and works. Like when they think of their mental states, what are they really thinking of? And I think that's a very important thing, because our listeners probably have a general conception of the mind.
Or at least they have enough of a sense of it to attempt some kind of a description.
Because we all kind of do. You can't escape the reality that we are thinking things, right? I mean, as far as we can remember,
if you ask
95%
of the population with a functional IQ,
yes,
what happens when you think?
Yes,
they could probably
say something,
say a sentence at least.
Yeah. So I don't know, like before you kind of saw all these other theories
in here, and also for the 2 seasons that we've
even prior to that, prior to like a lot of the discussions you've had, like coming out of high school, what was your general understanding of what the mind was?
I mean, obviously it was synapses in the brain to some in the most fundamental sense. I mean, I would probably not have had any formulated concept of the soul beyond vaguely believing that the soul is real.
Yeah.
I would not have known how to say anything about it.
Right.
And I probably would have made an analogy to computers or something.
Yes, yeah. And this is what I really love about this book, is that this is kind of how he starts.
No, he starts with perception.
With perception, yeah. Okay.
So he.
But what do you mean? Okay, yeah, keep on.
because he doesn't. The computer arguments don't come until like 2/3
later. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
But I think that he's trying to begin with the most basic interaction we have with our mind,
which is perception.
Yes. Yeah.
So he begins by articulating that it would seem most readily evident that one could prove that the world beyond the self exists because we perceive it.
Yes, yeah.
And that he literally starts the first chapter of the book beyond the introduction. Okay, you're reading this book. How do you know that? Are you reading this book? Which, obviously triggered me a little bit. Just insofar, we literally recorded an episode about how much I hate the "how do you know that" question.
Yeah,
he's like, how do you know you're reading it? And then he gives an example of, say, your friend. I don't remember what name he used. Your friend Frank tells you there's a party at so and so's house.
Yeah,
and you now know there's a party, but Frank is a notorious liar, and there is nothing in his demeanor that would tell you whether or not he's lying.
Yeah.
So how do you know that there's actually a party or not?
Yeah.
So it's essentially like how can you trust your perceptions themselves?
Yeah.
So what you see, hear, taste, feel, whatever, how can you trust those when they're just really obviously not reliable enough to tell you what's actually happening?
Right.
Because you can hallucinate, you can dream, there's all these, you can perceive things that aren't real, and people do constantly.
Yes, yeah.
So you cannot rely on your perceptions alone to tell you that there is a world external to you.
Yeah.
That you're perceiving really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you mind if I comment a little bit on this aspect?
Yeah,
and
I said spurg out as much as you want.
Yeah. And so this is going to go a little bit outside of his work, but this kind of ties into some of the research that I have done. And a large part of that really is because perception, in many ways, is influenced by language. It's influenced by past interactions with things. It's influenced by axioms in which you kind of introduce into your interaction with the world,
which entails belief and stuff.
Yes, because there is a distinction between sensational process and perceptual process. And so you have the sensational process, which is simply, if you take the sensation of sight, you have the light, hitting your eyes, going through the rods and cones, stimulating the rhodopsin and in a sense that signal to your brain.
That's the sensory process.
That's the sensory process, right? But for me to say that there is a fake brick wall behind you, that's perception. Because for one thing, I would have to know what it means for something to be fake. I would have to know something that is brick, that's all past knowledge and understanding of what that is. I have to kind of comprehend that there's dimensions of things behind or in foreground and so on and so forth. And so you begin, the perceptual process is a cognitive process. It's no longer
it involves interpretation of what
exactly.
of what you're sensing.
Yes,
that's what perception is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And so to kind of I guess expound on his point, it's that perception is not merely a sensational interaction with the world, but it really is your input on what the world is.
Yes, and he spends a lot of the book pitting different arguments and schools of thought against each other, whether or not sensory process is the same as perceptual process, or whether or not they're separate, and how do those interact? And I like that he brings up one point in this chapter that that I really enjoyed and had not ever thought of before. There's many things in this I just sitting alone would never have heard most of it. Because they're all theories I just from my most basic premises that I might posit about the structure of reality, I would literally never reach any of these conclusions. But so there's the argument, like the how do you know that argument is essentially how one might say it now, and this would come Descartes' did Descartes make an argument about a demon that would like...
Yeah, the evil
You
demon.
could argue, how do you know there's not a demon that exists outside of your mind that is...
Deceiving you.
Is deceive or imposing or implanting these thoughts in your mind.
Yes.
Whether or not it's attached to a body or it's floating or whatever.
Yeah.
That it's the same thing as like, oh, how do you know we don't live in a computer simulation?
Yeah.
They didn't have computers, but he made the same argument with a demon that would convince you.
Yep. Yeah.
That would just deceiving your mind.
Yeah.
And implanting thoughts in it, and like everything you've ever known or experienced or perceived or whatever is all a lie implanted in your ephemeral, formless mind.
Yes, yeah.
That were implanted by a demon, and you could say you're a brain in the vat, or you're a program being executed by a computer. Like what all these different. There's just different variations
of the same theory
for the last 500 years of whatever computational technology was available at the time. It's that thing you are. And people often adopt that position at least passively because it seems like it would be less complicated than proving that the world exists external to you.
Right, yes.
But the inverse is actually true.
Yes.
It would actually take a lot more intellectual horsepower to prove the facts. So it's not that, like, it seems very simple to just say, oh, I'm being deceived by it. I'm just a mind floating in this is the problem. You're a mind that's being deceived by a demon. Yeah. And that's just it. Okay, that's simple. Yeah. Okay, so the demon is deceiving you, which involves intentionality. It implies intentionality that the demon desires to deceive you for some reason. Yeah. You have to explore the desire of the demon. Yeah, yeah. Okay, now what does the demon look like? Where is he? What's the nature of the demon, and how does he interact with the to say there's a demon implies that there's a demon that occupies space and has form and stuff. So how does that interact with the form and space around him? Okay, now what's the mind that is being deceived? Where does that, like, that's just, there's no way.
Yeah, and in each one of these examples, that's what you do. You actually introduce more entities that are necessary to explain reality.
Yes.
And
it's kind of amazing.
Yes, it is, yeah. Because you do the whole matrix theory is the same thing.
So what do you think of like the, do you think, what's your relationship with Occam's razor? Like what's your, do you think that that's true? Like you just...
I think it's a good rule to follow, yeah.
That not necessarily...
Occam's razor many times is interpreted false. Occam's razor simply is that you shouldn't introduce more entities that are necessary.
Because the argument he gives for that, or the metaphor, I don't know how you call it, but it's like, if you can explain the wobble of a distant star by a planet orbiting it, why would you then explain it with by, and the only reason you can only see the star wobbling, you would assume, okay, there's some kind of medium-sized planet orbiting that star or whatever. Why would you then introduce the idea of 7 planets that orbit this thing? Because then you have to explain their relationship to each other, how their gravitational fields affect each other, because then that would have something to do with the way that they affect the gravitation or the wobble of the star or whatever. It's
and like a real life example of this that happened was in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the distinctions between Maxwell's theory of the ether and then Einstein's theory of relativity. It wasn't that Maxwell's theory was any less elegant or mathematically wrong. It really wasn't. I think, in fact, there were many people that were more convinced by it because...
That had more parts.
Yeah, had more parts.
Had more arguments involved, yeah.
Right. But in the end, you had to introduce the ether, which was an extra entity that Einstein's theory didn't need. And so because of that, they were like, well, you can't really prove that the ether exists. And so since you can't really prove the ether exists...
So that is actually an example of an actual God of the gaps kind of thing.
It is, yes. Okay. Yeah. And that's why it's the same problem that I have with like many students of quantum mechanics. They want to introduce multiverse theory to explain this single universe.
It's only the only nature of that argument is to fill a gap left by the theory. There's nothing about the theory itself that would lead you to believe that per se.
Exactly.
You're just fashioning a puzzle piece to shove in there.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That you need to literally posit an infinite amount of universes to explain the reality of this one universe, and
based on that, within that theoretical.
Yes, framework. Because they dig deep into the potentials rather than the actual. But that's the point.
At some point, he introduces the idea, just kind of following from this, and in by nature of our perceptions being flawed, the idea of kind of interchangeably indirect, representative, or causal realism, which is that there is a world external to us that is real in the metaphysical sense, that it exists and is beyond us, but we are only indirectly or representatively aware of it because our perceptions are flawed, and because our perceptions are flawed, we can't be 100% sure that whatever we're perceiving about the world is correct. So we can only be aware of our perception of it.
Yes, yeah.
Or of the external world.
Right, yes, yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that? Or
in this part, does he bring in Kant's theory, or
no? He doesn't. He does discuss Kant a little bit, but he's not a huge.
Okay. Yeah, he's
you
not
can
a huge Kantian.
Well, I feel like if you're going to talk about Descartes, you can talk about Kant kind of in the same era of,
because in general this was Kantian's notion with the noumenal world and the phenomenological world is that the noumenal world is the thing in itself, but the phenomenological world, at least your interaction with the noumena, is all that we really do know. Is that anything outside of that, what the thing is in itself, is something that is not ever known, because in order for it to be the thing in itself, you have to be the thing in itself, if that makes sense. That you can't have any mediation. But when we know something, we know it through the mediation of the mind. We know it through the mediation of language, of perception, of physical realities, of the senses of the ears, the eyes, the smell, and everything. And so there's always a mediation of knowing the thing. And so we never know the thing in itself.
Well, it's just mediated by the fact that you're a corporeal being.
Yeah. And so since there's always a mediation, we never know the thing in itself. We only know the thing considered. And the thing considered is...
You can only know the thing itself if there is no mediation at all.
Yes, which is impossible. It would be like
because you are not that thing.
If I take this wine glass, shoved it in me, and I become the wine glass.
Like even then,
I would have to be the wine glass, and I cannot articulate it then because I'm simply a wine glass.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to know anything at all, since a knowing is a human mental process, it's to know something by definition would be to know something. It would be mediated, and so. And so, I think that's a pretty interesting observation of mental states.
Because then this, because there's something, this would introduce that idea that like everything is mediated and you can't necessarily 100%, you can't trust your perception almost at all ever, purely on its own. Introduces a level of skepticism.
Yes, yeah.
Just inherent in thinking anything that you just really can't. And Descartes did. When did the phrase "the God of the gaps" come to be? Do you know?
I don't know.
Because I would imagine that's more contemporary.
It is, yeah. I know it's definitely more contemporary, but I don't know if it came out in the 1800s or the late 1700s. But it's not earlier than that.
It's obviously a very atheistic thing to say.
Yes, yeah.
But Descartes would explain the what did they call it? So do you want to move to dualism? Can we just?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so or really quickly, we should. So this was the first time, or at least it is the first point at which philosophy as a pursuit began to really question the mind-body problem in the way that it did.
Yeah.
And I had an epiphany that I think was kind of interesting to me that I want to discuss later.
Okay.
When we hit it.
Yeah.
It's very obvious to me why this problem came to be.
Okay.
We don't necessarily want to discuss it now because I would like there to be a payoff in a similar way that there is in the book.
Yeah.
Like what I was texting you and stuff.
Yeah.
But what is the mind-body problem?
So the mind
as it's formulated now.
And so the mind-body problem is attributed to Cartesian dualism. Mm-hmm. Even though I think in the contemporary times they want to attribute it to anything before like eliminativism in general. Mm-hmm. But traditionally just Cartesian dualism, and that's because in Cartesian dualism you have two separate substances. You have immaterial substance and material substance. Mm-hmm. And because you have two separate substances, how do they really coincide with one another? How do they coexist with one another? Because, if the immaterial substance is in itself an independent substance, and the material substance is an independent substance, and yet the immaterial has no space and time, how does it interact with the material substance? Mm-hmm. And so that's
essentially what the mind-body problem is.
Yeah.
Because... I don't know if I could articulate why Cartesian dualism came to be. I don't know why. I mean, I can, with just like we could home run it right now and end the episode. Like I understand generally why, but like why did he
come to that conclusion?
Yeah, like what's the argument for that?
And so if you read the text that this is normally derived from is from his Meditations. I believe it's found in Meditations 2 or 3. I can't fully remember. Yeah. And so in his Meditations, he posits that, so he, I mean, just to give a quick introduction to Descartes. And so what we have to kind of comprehend in the Cartesian world at this time was the elimination of scholasticism. Mm-hmm. And so we have to fully be aware that Descartes has no understanding, no knowledge of Aquinas.
It's because Protestants banned Catholic.
Yes, they banned
So
it,
what?
Right?
So Catholic metaphysics were essentially an extension of Greek metaphysics.
Yes, yeah.
It's like metaphysically, not their theology itself wasn't obviously was not an extension of Greek thought, but like the way that they conceived of the structure of physical reality, especially, and its relationship with form and stuff was very Aristotelian, especially.
Right. Yeah. And Descartes grew up in a pietistic community. Mm-hmm. And so as you know, like many people know about the Puritans because that's where there were the American founders. Many of them, not the founding fathers, but the people who came over were Puritans. But in the part that was not Anglo, like the French and the German and everything, that they had a movement called Pietism, and so Pietism is very similar to Puritanism. So they have they have the inversion of morality, where sexual and physical more immoral behaviors
are worse than
flesh.
Lesser goods, essentially.
Lesser good, yeah. And so there are a lot of those similar things. But the other thing that they really shared with Puritans was that they believed that the Catholic Church was the whore of Babel, and so. I know it sounds funny, but
it sounds like a metal album to me every time you say it.
But they truly believe this. So they read the Book of Revelation, and
what is the whore of Babel?
So the whore of Babel. So you have the pregnant lady who is the church in the Book of Revelation, and then you have the whore. And then the whore is the enticing. Yeah, it's the enticing figure who manipulates the majority of the world and everything. Okay. And so they believe that the Catholic Church was that whore, and that they grabbed a hold of every Christian after the year 300 and then manipulated them. With the hierarchy, blah, 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 right?
We've covered that many times.
Yes, and so what's important about this is that Descartes was born and raised in this sphere, and early on, right? And so
Luther didn't do Luther's thing until the 1530s or something,
right? Yes,
and Descartes was writing in the late 1500s.
Yes, yeah, and so he was 1500s, 1600s, but it was already after the Protestant Revolt.
But it would have been within less than a century after.
But the Pietists also rejected many of Lutheran thought.
But Descartes would have been writing. It's like if I'm writing history about World War II, it's the same span of time. Mm-hmm. Luther likely was alive during the same period.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
I don't know that.
Yeah, but it's possible.
I'm going to fact check myself,
Yeah.
but you keep talking.
And so from this, he has no comprehension and no understanding of Aristotelian thought, of Peter Abelard, of Boethius.
Okay, so Luther died 40 years before Descartes was born, but still.
Okay, yeah, but it's still early. It's early within a Protestant world.
Who would have died 40 years before me? Eisenhower didn't die 40 years before I was born.
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, but people live shorter than too.
But still. Still.
And so that's a very important thing to have. So in his meditations, he wants to begin from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so from the very beginning, he says, what is the one thing that's indubitable? Because everything is doubtful.
Yeah.
So what is undoubtable? That's all that indubitable means. So what is indubitable? And so the one thing is that he exists. Because he says, in order for me to doubt that I exist, I must exist in order to doubt my existence.
Did he say cogito ergo sum?
No.
Ergo sum?
No. That was writers after him. Like that was in his...
Because Feser several times says that Descartes said that.
Yeah, he didn't.
And I remembered when I heard him say that Descartes said it, I was like, I don't think he actually said that.
Yeah. His argument essentially is synthesized to that. So it's kind of like for example, when you and I were discussing qualia, we try to synthesize it to a formulation.
But it's still his argument.
It's still his argument, yes.
Synthesized.
Yes, and so it is his argument. I think, therefore I am is Descartes' argument, but he himself didn't write those words.
Like you can say, I think, therefore I am, but I could have before you said, I am perceiving and thinking and interacting with my perceptions, blah, 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 blah. Therefore that must mean that there is a mind that pre-exists that I inhabit. Like,
that's what it is.
It's
the same argument.
Yeah.
And so, that was his essential argument. So once he could come to that conclusion, he says, this is the one thing that's called a clear and distinct idea. This is the one idea that I cannot doubt. I cannot doubt that I exist. Mm-hmm. But with that, everything else is still doubtable. I could still doubt that my body exists. I could still doubt that my perceptions are real. I could still doubt that you exist.
But you can say I am.
But I am is undoubtable.
Okay, now what's I?
What is I? Yes. And so this way he called the res cogitas. This is the thinking thing. And so, and what I do like, there's much of Descartes that I dislike, but the one thing I do like about Descartes is that I think this is almost like a very good phenomenological investigation of a human psyche. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at a baby developing, this is normally the first thing that they encounter, is that when they're first born, they don't really encounter the I. They're just feeding, they're breastfeeding
for years.
Not for years, but for months.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they're not really encountering their individualness, but you normally know when they do. And when they do, they begin to rebel a little bit. They begin to...
Well, they test boundaries.
They test boundaries because they're developing this understanding as like, no, I am. And so I think Descartes' investigation is very interesting, that it is the first thing that we kind of encounter. And we don't encounter it in the sense that I am my extended body, but that I am an individual. That I am a thinking thing outside of my mom and outside of my...
And something that comes several times.
Yeah.
And later on we will... we will engage it more fully and from certain angles, but there is no real way to know that so I exist and I have a mind and I'm thinking.
Yeah.
There is no way for me to know what that's a wall that is made pink by a light or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Without first understanding that I am a thing that interacts with other things.
Yeah.
So the first step is understand. I think that unless you do this for a living, people don't understand that it's not necessarily that you're the center of the universe and you're the diviner of truth or whatever. But
right. But it
the
does.
self
I think we should come back to that because there is a reason why, in later philosophical ideas,
okay, so we'll say
that does become
Okay.
But keep going.
So this Cartesian dualism is, I think he starts the.
It's because we first understand ourselves as a thinking thing, and then we can investigate our extended body.
And it's I will credit Descartes
Yeah.
with the fact that the fact that essentially Descartes reinvented philosophy for the Protestant world.
Yes,
after they were cut off from the Greeks and the rest of their history.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
That is.
From the revolt to Descartes, which was, Descartes wasn't born 100 years after the revolt.
No.
50 to 60, I think.
Yes, yeah.
50, 60, 70.
No, you said 40 years.
Well, the lifespan was 40 years.
Oh,
but
I
the
see.
revolt would have happened.
Yeah, so like
within
about
60,
70.
70.
Yeah.
So that's longer than me to World War II.
Yes, yeah.
Or no, it's shorter.
Shorter.
That would have been like literally imagine Descartes exists in a bubble, a philosophical bubble from like the distance at now 2022 to like 1950.
Yes, yeah.
Which is, it's amazing that someone is that influential. That's just that.
Yes.
The fact that he comes up to that.
Yeah.
It kind of explains the self-orientation of philosophy of the modern era. But I don't remember what my point was.
You said it was impressive that
it's just, it is impressive. But
and so that's why the dualism exists, because you have the res cogitos and the res extensa.
So he goes from, so actually he posits the so all along the way, Feser, when he's writing, he like drops these arguments, and something I wanted to understand. I wanted you, if you knew, so the conceivability argument is that if you can actually conceive of something, that it must be metaphysically possible. That's the argument. It's just, there's a lot of times when Feser's writing where it's like he's writing the argument for other people so well you can't understand if this is what he's saying, or if this is just what he's saying for somebody else. So it's like you can understanding the physiology of the body conceive at least in an imagistic way of waking up one day and looking in the mirror and you don't have eyes but you can still see. So that means that
Can I make just one quick side note?
Yes.
This is what a good like academic and investigator does. And since you've done language, you kind of comprehend this.
Yeah.
And for the audience, I would say if they ever really want to understand like points of views, is that you know like within language, when you're speaking Spanish, everything changes. It isn't so much that you have like the words in your head that you translate. You're not saying like in your head table, and then it's like mesa is a translation of the word table. When you really immerse yourself into the language, you go directly to the source. And so you have the word mesa and you relate that to the actual physical object. And so when you begin to do that, like this happens to me many times. And so when I was a baby, my first language was Spanish, right? And then I learned English when I was 4 or 5 years old. But if I'm around,
I mean, I'm the flip. I started learning Spanish when I was 5.
But still the same. And so if you put me in a restaurant and everybody in the back is what normally ends up happening was that my mannerisms begin to change, right? Because it's like to speak a language properly, everything kind of changes. Your hand gestures, the placement of your tongue, the head, the way you place your head, and everything. And people that have lived in foreign countries kind of know this. If you live in a foreign country long enough, you begin to walk like them, and you begin to have the same kind of taste and everything like them. And that's when you know you comprehend that language. And when you're investigating like some kind of actual doctrine or philosophical thought or idea, what Feser does really well is that he just immerses himself into it. And so you kind of have to know the argument from every single angle, not as a translation or a refutal of whatever preconceived notions you have, but as the argument as it is itself, and how it can be lived. And so with anybody, I would say that is the best way, because a lot of times, like if I'm discussing with somebody who seems to be just hard-headed, a lot of it just comes about because they already have arguments in place in their head. And so when they're discussing with you, they don't actually want to discuss and understand. They just want to say the arguments that's already in their head. And there were so many academics this way. Like when I went to grad school, there were so many people that way. So much so that the moment that I could present an argument to them that they have never heard before, they know not what to say. Yes. It's like they're just lost. They're like, I don't know what to say.
They would only formulate the arguments of other insofar as they could reply to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then they would just get more entrenched, and they were almost kind of deterred, change the argument to say what they already wanted to say rather than addressing the argument at hand. But no, a good way to do it, just immerse yourself into it. It's like if you want to know, we're going to discuss later, eliminative materialism, you have to be an eliminative materialist. You have to know it from every way out. But anyways, I'm
trying to see how long. Okay, that comes 2 pages from now.
Oh, does it? Okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyway,
but yeah, you continue.
I'm trying to maintain the structure of the book the way he argues it.
Yeah. But this is one thing I do like about him.
Yes.
And when you said
he's so extremely good at articulating. Because you can look up how he articulates something in 2 paragraphs and look up the Wikipedia article for that thing, and it's exactly what they said but shorter.
Yes, yeah.
It's really impressive.
Yeah.
But he starts to go from because this is an introductory text.
Yeah.
So especially listening to it, it can be kind of hard to organize everything. That's why I started taking notes. I was literally making bullet points of topics, and then I started again, and then I was like, okay, I got to actually type out paragraphs and notes and stuff. But he starts to go into specific other thinkers and schools of thoughts and their relationship to the topic of the chapter. So this is dualism, so he'll start to explain different schools of dualism.
Okay, yeah.
So occasionalism, what is that?
How does he describe it? I'm not too sure what that means.
It was that the mind and body operate completely separately.
Okay.
And that God serves as the link between.
Yeah.
So there's the kind of the metaphor of like 2 clocks operating independently, but happening by divine intervention to be on the same time.
Yes, okay. And so that's definitely one form of dualism that, and I think what a lot of the dualism kind of has in common, and I know I didn't reread it, and so I don't know if he covers this in this book, but
we'll cover what just say whatever you think would be helpful.
And so it's that sometimes it depends which one of his writings you read. He includes like composite realities part of dualism, which I kind of hesitate to do, because I do think composite reality is more monism, that you're saying there's one substance that's composite of things.
Which is something we will cover.
Yes, yeah. But in this type of dualism, so you have 2 independent entities. And I think we're within a lot of like more pop culture Protestant religions, as well as many Catholics that are not well versed in the Catholic theology, kind of have this point of view, is that they think that you have this independent soul, and that the soul is some kind of driver of the body, and that the only thing that unites them is God. And so you have God as the entity, as the main entity, and then you have these 2 independent realities that are united by God. And that the moment that you die, God kind of eliminates the corporeal reality, and then you unified yourself with God in that way. And so there's always God in the head of that kind of dualism.
Because essentially these occasionalism, parallelism, epiphenomenalism, etc. are essentially responses to Cartesian dualism and like just solutions.
Right, yes, yeah.
Little explanations.
Yeah.
Because so I will admit there are especially when we start to get into causal theories of philosophy of mind, I'm going to have no idea how to articulate it.
Okay, yeah.
Like, I can remember my notes and kind of remember how he said it.
Yeah.
But it's so far beyond how I think about the world.
Right, yeah.
That I would literally have to memorize sentences to just say it right.
Yes.
Because it's so beyond what I think.
That's why I think it's good that you have those notes, because...
It's 8 pages.
Yeah.
This was just typed on my phone like this.
Yeah.
I would scroll, and it would take me like 25 seconds to scroll. But parallelism, I could only really describe... At some point in this note, I would literally go back and just type what the Australian woman said was. So for
Which
this
is good, yeah.
This parallelism is essentially the theory in philosophy that things occur in the body and in the mind independently without any causal relationship, which makes no sense to me. And I don't know how I could logically deconstruct that, because it just doesn't. I'd have to just imagine what premises there. Right, Feser does an incredible job in this at starting from a point and building their premises to what this is. Yeah. I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
Because he then introduces the idea of the problem of epiphenomenalism, essentially. That so epiphenomenalism is essentially the view that there is a phenomena of some kind that exists or is or whatever beyond the body and mind that cause them to interact together. Right, yes. Because that's not necessarily a school of thought as much as it is a feature. Yes, yeah. And I hope this is listenable for people, because I'm just trying to work through this freaking book I went through.
Let's see if we could just try to put this
synthesize this?
Yeah, as layman as we can, right?
Okay.
And so
this is what I was listening to this, and I was like, this is going to be the most nerdy garbage anybody's ever heard.
Because most people don't know about epiphenomenalism. And so
what is epiphenomenalism?
Yeah, well, for first, let's discuss this issue, right? And so you have this issue, and that we all, I would hope, encountered at some point in our life, right?
Yes.
And so you have this issue where...
You're doing the Asian eyes. Someone's going to screenshot that.
Okay, fine. And so we have this issue where
someone screenshot both of us doing the eyes and make a meme out of it, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to articulate it as simply as possible. Okay. So whenever we have some kind of, I guess, introspection,
yes,
we realize that.
So when you say introspection, the problem is that refers to that could refer to capital I introspection.
I don't.
That comes later. Okay.
I know, yeah. I don't mean it's that, but I just mean that, you're sitting in bed, right?
Yes.
Or maybe somebody that smoked a little too much weed. And
you don't know that, but anyway.
I don't know that, but I'm saying if somebody did, right?
Okay.
And so let's say they're just thinking about certain things. Okay. The issue arises is that you can look at inanimate objects, and you could look at other animals, and you can look at everything, and that there is one distinct quality about you, and the one distinct quality about you are really these mental processes. Are these abstractions, the categorizations, the ability to speak, the fact that we can even just think about our own existence. Like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be me? Who am I? You could look at all these people in the contemporary world that are struggling with sexual agenda, and they want to know, am I a woman? Am I a man? Am I, a zer or whatever? Am I nothing? I mean, the thing about the human quality is that we're constantly investigating what does it mean for me to exist at all, because it's weird.
Okay, so we need to eventually talk about. I just had a little thought that the trans thing is people investigating what it means to be a man without metaphysics. Anyway. Yeah.
Only
through scientific means.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And so it's something that we always encounter. And I think that the only way that you don't encounter this, if you're truly that brain dead, Because I don't think it takes like a great, significant mind to just ponder, what is all this for? What am I?
Even just for a second.
Even just for a second, right?
You don't have to sit there and write books about it.
You don't, right? But just for a second, and you might want to synthesize it in your head so you could sleep that night. But the thing is that it's a weird phenomena. Is that we never talk about ourselves as if we are the body. Mm-hmm. We talk about my hand. We talk about my finger, my foot, my leg, my arm, my body. Mm-hmm. Like even in our ordinary conversation, we already separate the I from the extension of what that I operates. Mm-hmm. It's like I have me. I know that I am me, but my body is not identical to the meanness, but that I in some way operate the body that is the meanness. Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of what
I would say that most people who are not super philosophically inclined or educated or whatever, who are not familiar with concepts of philosophy generally, would, I mean, even in the way that like ancient civilizations and not having the philosophical equipment to explain what they were experiencing or what was, they just come up with metaphors and allegories and analogies. So like if you know how a computer operates, you might assume that, okay, because I know how a computer operates, I'm just going to attribute that to how I operate. Now I can sleep. Yes,
and that's what they kind of do. Like, so it's, my mind is like the hard drive, right? And then my outer shell is
that's sufficient to keep me asleep at night.
Yes, that's sufficient, right? Yeah, yes. For somebody that's not, but for somebody who wants to think further, you realize that that's a really insufficient answer.
Yes,
and this is what this investigation does, because it does yield that problem that there's a separation. Like even if you take the computer example, that you still would say there's a separation between the hard drive, the information that holds it, the motherboard, and the processor that operates it, and then the outer shell that everybody sees. That is not identical to those things inside there. And so we understand that there are distinctions here. And I think this distinctions, I don't want to say forces us, but gives us an insight that there is a difference between a mental process and everything else that I do in my life, like everything else.
There's something about the action of thought that is distinct from the action of moving this glass.
Of eating, when I take a piss, when you fuck, or when you masturbate, or when you go to work,
when you text somebody, when you call somebody, all of the things that you do, the distinct quality of thought that and thought is a chapter, which we will come to several pages from now. This is going to be a marathon episode for me. I think it's just going to be. We're already an hour, 10 minutes, so it's going to take forever. You sound better, by the way. When you're more engaged, you're more awake now. So the idea of thought, which is
at least just the phenomena of thought,
or the action of thought, which means to utilize the mind, is the only thing that while you are doing it, you cannot be distracted from the fact that you are doing it. You can be driving and be like, oh my God, it's been 10 minutes and I just like autopiloted.
Right, yes.
Like, oh my God, I don't remember that I've been like doing this one monotonous task, and you can't forget that you're thinking.
Right, yes, And we do it all the fucking time. That is our life. That is our existence. I mean, so much so that most philosophers in the ancient world simply call us rational animals. It was like this process of thought that we have is so unique. That is what distinguishes us from everything else. Like everything else that we encounter in the world is that like you met like my little daughters and whatever. Is that if one of them, saw a dog start talking, they either will be terrified or laugh at the absurdity. Because it doesn't even take a great intellect to realize that's fucking weird.
Right? Or at least they would run and tell somebody.
They would, yeah. So like it stands on hind leg. It was like, well, how are you doing today? And then you see a dog doing that. Like, what the fuck? Like, that's weird. That's bizarre. Is because there is...
Even if it's just
like even a baby understands that what they're doing every day is so unique and so specific to what it means to be them. They don't understand the concept.
Well, there is
of
a point
humanity.
at which that reasoning would move from inductive to deductive, but even if you just understand that deductively, I've never seen you talk cock.
Yes, yeah.
This is at least remarkable.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that we at that point, I think this is a good segue that we start to move into
that
material explanations as to why we think at all.
Yes. But like to hit the thing you said, like parallelism.
Yeah.
The issue with that was that, well, then if that is a reality, if there's a reality that
so reiterate what parallelism is.
It's that you have two parallel realities, basically. That's where the term comes from. You have the material reality,
which is, I would say,
reality.
that's the most hardcore version of dualism.
It is, right, yes. And that there is no real interaction between the two, that you have to have two different phenomena to interact with the two. And they happen in a parallel sphere. Right, that you have the
material, which is the functions of the body,
yes,
and then the immaterial, which is the function of the mind.
Right,
would happen independently of each other, but parallel in a way that would work together.
Yes,
but bridged by God. Well, not even by God.
No, that's the other one. Yeah,
parallelism would just be that I don't know.
They're just happening in parallel realities.
Which,
yes, okay.
I just don't even have anything. I don't have anything to say about that. But then we move the next chapter. So we have it is a whole long thing on dualism. The chapter on perception is short but dense.
Yeah,
dualism,
but
is
it's important.
Long. Well, yes, he does a beautiful job of succinctly.
Yeah,
well,
because it is our first encounter with our mind.
Well, he succinctly articulates the way in which that perception alone is not enough.
Yes.
Let's move to.
Yeah.
He starts with Descartes, which I think is interesting because this could have been longer and he could have. Explain why he did that, because I know why he did that after I listened to it again. But we move to he just goes right into material arguments of
which is the most popular of our time.
Yes. Yeah. Material and by extension computational. But what materialism is, how I think literally. That's the beautiful thing is I synthesized in sentences what he was saying. So materialism holds most fundamentally that things are understood most accurately when taken apart and assessed mechanically. That the way that one understands the world or being or the self or the mind or whatever, when that there is a most fundamental mechanical process that can be understood, and once you understand that, then everything that's the reason for it's the cause of everything. He goes into reason versus cause, which I think which I'd not really thought about before, but he goes this made sense to me. It's when he starts going into qualia that I'm like but idealism and stuff. But he distinguishes between materialism as a umbrella and then physicalism versus naturalism.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have much to say about that?
The two branches of materialism.
What's the distinction between them?
And so in general, materialism, first you have to understand that they have a very specific understanding of matter. Yeah. And so classically, matter wasn't understood purely mathematically. It wasn't until Descartes in which matter itself was simply understood mechanically.
So is he essentially the father of like modern physics?
In many ways, yes.
Physics?
Yeah, in many ways, yeah. He is, yeah.
Okay.
And so understanding mechanically and mathematically is matter in that way. Because remember, before matter itself was also spiritual. And so, but we get to that in the end.
Yeah.
And so we're
edging right now.
Yes. And so when you have physicalism, physicalism is really the almost like the brute manifestation of the comprehension of materialism as pure mechanical matter, right? Yeah. And what was the other one that he introduced in that one?
Naturalism.
And and so naturalism, I mean, for many things, is a misunderstanding of like Aristotelian nature, but
which 95% of the people I talk to misunderstand what nature is.
They do, yes. Yeah. And so they kind of hold this naturalism point of view, which is something that is untouched by man.
So how do you apply that to mind, the mind?
Because
when I think of that concept, I think of like trees.
Yes, and so in some way...
But not bonsai trees.
Right, yes. Or like Mr. Miyagi
like topiary,
trimming the bonsai trees.
Or like topiaries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like that's not natural. That's not nature. Yeah.
I think in this sense, it is that which is not really manipulated by, I guess, preconceived notions of...
You articulated it really perfectly one time in season 1.
Oh, did I?
I think it was that which occurs beyond the will of man, or something.
Yes,
That's how you said it. Or it was something like that.
Yes,
early.
Yes, yeah.
Like possibly in the episodes that are not currently up online. So
yes, yeah.
Which we have to eventually release because we were so excited and young and
naive. We'll put that behind the paywall, though. Those would be
Don't give it away. Because I really bulleted. There were certain points when I would like so deeply not understand what he was talking about that I would literally bullet point the name and be like, I hope Jeremy knows what this is.
Yeah.
But there's a point at which he's... So when you said interaction earlier, you were just using the word interaction as we would use it. What is interaction in reference to philosophy of mind?
We're talking about like
the interaction between body and mind. So I don't know if you could articulate it better than literally how the body and the mind interface.
Right. Yes.
But he says something about how the problem of interaction, like what that constitutes, is the main criticism of dualism.
Yeah.
And the primary motivation of materialism. In philosophy of mind is that.
I would say that's definitely accurate because the problem is that when you have this mind-body problem, it's basically the problem of interaction. It's, how is it that an immaterial substance in any way interacts with a material substance? Like so you have like parallelism, which, like you said, doesn't really make much sense at all.
Yeah,
because they're just, it's one of the worst solutions.
And really, if anybody's actually interested in reading this after we talk about it, if you're not bored to death or whatever, let's not assume that the listener isn't interested because this is fun. Sorry, I don't mean to say anything about that. This is sorry.
Because I get excited about this stuff.
I am too. So let's just assume that the listener is also excited and stop apologizing for what we're talking about, essentially.
But I would say like the other...
or me. That's mainly me.
Yeah.
But everybody goes like, why the fuck are you talking about this?
But by having like this conception that I would say many contemporary like Protestants and other heretics have that in some way God unites the two separate substances, at least offers a solution to the problem of having two independent entities existing. And so the uniting factor would be God. And that's kind of a Cartesian thought, right? Is that Descartes' solution to the evil demon problem was that there must be a good God that doesn't allow you to be deceived. And so the res extensa is real because the good God is in some way not manipulating you or deceiving you, that the external world is real, that the external world is true. But for most parts, I mean, many times they bring in Occam's razor here, right? They're saying, well, then you have to introduce the entity that is God in order to justify the reality of your perception of the external world. Now, what always...
And then also mediate that with a demon.
Right, mediate that with everything, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And so what always kind of boggled my mind here, and this kind of goes to rationalism that I think we'll discuss afterwards, is that materialism and rationalism basically take one of those two dualities and say this is what's real. And so materialism say the res extensa of the Cartesian dualism is what's real. The external material world that is quantifiable mathematically and mechanical is what's real, and that the the res cogitas, the thinking immaterial reality, is not real. While what you're going to find with rationalism is that rationalism is going to state that what is real is actually the immateriality, and that instantiates the particular realities. Like in some way, rationalism is where you impart reality from the mind, because the mind is what's most real and the particular things aren't.
Yeah.
And that the res extensa is not. And so basically what the only solutions you have when you have Cartesian dualism is that only one of those two things can be real, that the other part is not real. And so what materialism does is saying that to posit an immaterial reality is bunk. That's just
well, it's because the material world is causally closed by necessity. There is nothing that exists beyond the material that causes.
But also, you take Occam's razor, where you just eliminate it.
Yeah.
Right, and that goes back to eliminativism,
which you really want to talk about. We'll get to eventually.
Well, because eliminativism is the logical end to materialism.
Yes.
Because materialism is
they're the
yes,
vanguards.
It's a masturbatory.
Okay.
And I mean mediation to eliminativism, but then and so when you have two separate existing realities, that cannot interact with one another, because you really can you can't really interact them with either introducing God or without introducing some kind of weird phenomena that could unify these two realities. That then you just must eliminate one of them.
Yeah.
Either eliminate the material world or eliminate the immaterial world. So only one of those two things can be real.
So you're either a brain in the vat.
Yes.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Or there's nothing beyond the physical.
Yes, there's nothing beyond the physical. Yeah.
Or what you can see or observe. The next two things he would contrast are behaviorism,
yeah,
and functionalism.
Yes.
What are those things?
So behaviorism is the famous Freud.
What do they write here? So
read
So how he, I think this is an exact quote.
Yeah.
So behaviorism might be defined as like, to attribute a mind to something is to attribute the mind to certain behavioral dispositions, and to have the relevant behavioral dispositions itself is itself to have a mind.
Yes.
And this is very Darwinist. This seems very, very late 19th century to me. Almost Freudian.
And in early 20th century. So Freud is actually considered a behaviorist.
Because when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, so this is like Freud and stuff.
Most of the early 20th century psychologists were behaviorists. And so when you read most of
the mind consists of a complex network of behaviors that are nothing more than that which is programmed by conditioning.
Yes, yeah.
They're just behavior. Like the mind consists of a complex network of behaviors that are conditioned in a person.
Yes. And so most of like the famous pop culture psychologists that we know of today,
Jung and etc.
Yes, they're all
Jung was a weirder one.
Yes, but he's still considered a behaviorist.
Yes, he vaguely appeals to archetypes and God all the time because he knows that it's not sufficient. I want to cover something by Jung with you at some point.
I think
because I have this weird like warm like for Jung that kind of. I like Jung.
Yeah.
He's just cool to me.
Yeah.
Because he makes all these religious appeals all the time.
That,
Because he was willing to bridge psychology and theology in a way that Freud wasn't. That's literally why their friendship split up.
Yes.
But anyway, whatever.
And Lacan is another one, if you...
Kind of.
Yeah.
Should we cover something about Lacan? I've never read Lacan.
Oh, you didn't yet?
I've had this weird, like, visceral, like, disgust with Lacan.
Oh, really? Yeah.
For no reason other than, like, Zizek really likes Lacan or something.
Yes, a lot of people who like Freud and Jung like Lacan.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting for me now to read it and see what I think of it. Anyway, because, like, identity theory comes from this.
It does, yes.
What is identity theory?
In, like,
in philosophy of mind. Do you know? Could you articulate? Or is it too complicated? This is just literally one of my bullet points from like identity theory. I hope Jeremy knows that.
Yes, yeah.
It's almost like I'm an
I mean, I think we could synthesize it pretty well. I mean, identity theory is when you're a behaviorist, your behavior is simply a complex like network of
behaviors attributed to
behaviors attributed to you, right?
Yeah.
And so there are no universal realities.
Well, there's nothing universal of which that network partakes that
there's nothing,
has any causal relationship with it at all.
It doesn't, yes.
Or formal relationship or whatever.
Yeah. And so the classical view of identity was that there was an actual reality. So there's like a masculine reality, there's a feminine reality, there's a religious reality, all these things. And so we can conform our psyche to those realities and manifest them the best way possible. With behaviorism...
Because this is a very Darwinist
it is,
theory.
Yes. Yeah.
Like however our minds operate is just the best way in the evolutionary process that our minds functioned to best suit the survival of our genes or whatever.
Right, yes, yeah. And so with a behaviorist view of identity, it was first the elimination of these universals. And once you eliminate the universals, and then you don't identify as something external from you, but identity becomes an internal, I guess, subjective reality of whatever things that you've been socialized into. And so since things are socially determined with many behaviorists. And
I will say that based on some other conversation we've had, this is not postmodern.
No. Postmodernists take a lot of these ideas.
Yes. I think I'm more as an inside joke referencing to you that this is not
Yes,
theory.
And so the idea is that and Lacan actually writes quite a bit about this because he writes a lot about transsexuals and stuff, and so that there's I think he wrote about this certain judge, maybe it was Freud, I think it was Lacan, but a certain judge that that was basically seeing things when he looked himself in the mirror and everything, but that's besides the point. That there are no universal principles, but there are only subjective, I guess, expressions of what we've been taught and what we've been socially constructed. And so since we have a socially constructed view of femininity, it isn't as if you're adapting as a female to the qualities of universal principles of what it means to be female, rather that you identify subjectively with certain behaviors that is known and understood societally in this structure as feminine. And so your identity is self-identified. Like it isn't identified by the external realities of what it means to be feminine. Rather,
so the mind is what is just whatever we understand to be the thing that does
it
what it does. It's not
due to your behavior of those things.
Yeah.
And that's all that it really is. And so and
I would say it's just interesting that this because Feser at some point, Edward Feser, the author of what we're talking about, if anyone's forgot, because we haven't said his name for a while. He says that any serious philosopher of mind now is not a behaviorist. This is an old.
Yes, yeah.
There's people who are Cartesian dualists. There's something about this theory that fell off.
It did.
But I would say a lot of laymen are behaviorists.
Yes, they are.
So there's like a hangover amongst like in pop philosophy and psychology that hangs on to this.
Yes.
But no one actually in academia or anybody doing this as a professional pursuit or that spends all their time doing is a behaviorist anymore.
No, they're not.
That's a very interesting. I had that thought while I was he said like no one's a behaviorist. I'm like, everyone I know is a behaviorist.
Yes, yeah. and I do find that interesting because even when I was in grad school, that's the one thing I also discovered was nobody that is seriously investigating the mind is a behaviorist. and nobody that's seriously investigating artificial intelligence is a computational theorist.
Yes.
And that's what I found interesting. And there was a student that was in grad school with me that in his second year he switched over to artificial intelligence, developing AI. And in grad school, when people are getting their PhDs in AI, nobody thinks that they're actually going to build a computer that will become conscious. None of them really do. Nobody takes that serious anymore. That was serious back in the 1950s and 60s, but now...
In the wake of Turing and stuff,
yes,
which we will come to.
But but now they don't take that serious. It's like, no, that's impossible. And
I would say that among people that I know,
yes,
even who discuss that, it's not that it's impossible. It's that that's not their goal anymore.
It isn't.
They don't care.
But it isn't their goal because they realize that that's not possible.
I think that the smart people did, but most people...
Yes, but when you talk about pop culture,
yeah,
most like pop culture academics...
Is this why movies aren't made about like AI that kills people as
right,
much
yes,
anymore?
yeah.
It's just not...
And so the pop culture people still believe that if you talk to most generic podcasters or pop culture people that are really into AI... They still think that they're going to build a computer one day
that would become conscious.
That's going to become conscious.
Pass the Turing test.
Yes,
yeah.
And then there's also people that are really in the pop culture world that love behaviorism, and they still quote Freud, they still quote Lacan, they still.
Well, it's because those people were eloquent.
Yeah, they were eloquent. Yes,
they sound good.
Yes, but their theories are not taken serious at all.
Yeah,
it's like in the academic world, they're just not taken serious at all.
Yeah.
If you go there and you're taking psychology courses and be like, I'm a Freudian, they would probably kick you out or laugh at you.
And a lot of people would attribute that to a misunderstanding of Freud, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, but it's not a misunderstanding of behaviorism.
Yes,
behaviorism,
because anyone who... It's almost like there's an inverse where, like, if you're going to take Jung seriously in the 20 years into the 21st century, you can't be interpreting him as a behaviorist. You have to be extracting something else from it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so we need to contrast behaviorism with functionalism.
Ooh, okay. So functionalism,
it's a slightly different.
It is. One time, one of my professors kind of put it this way. He said that functionalism was realizing that you cannot express anything of the mind without teleology. Yeah. But they're too afraid to become Aristotelians.
That's kind of what he was saying in the later parts. So if you want to save it.
Okay, yeah. But in some way, that's what functionalism is. And so functionalism attempts to, I guess, say that things have inherent... In functionalism in the... so first of all, so functionalism in the metaphysical sense is that things have inherent functions, right? Is that things are not simply arbitrary, that there's functions. So when you bring functionalism to the philosophy of mind, it was that there is an inherent function of the mind. And they don't want to call it purpose. So not going to say this is the purpose of the mind, but this is the function of the mind. And so since this is the function of the mind... So
it's teleology without saying it.
Yes, it's teleology with people being too...
Or whether... So it's I think that I remember that there was like the functionalism is like... There's something about there's nothing universal about the function. It's opposed by its conception by people and like
and so some of it gets wacky. And so I remember I had a discussion.
It's almost like how if you and I were to discuss the teleology of glass, that's a little bit different than the teleology of the leaves of a tree or something because it's man-made. Yes. It's almost like they apply the man-made part to
exactly.
everything.
That's what. Okay. And so many functionalists, for example, say that there is no real distinction between a leg and a prosthetic leg, because they both function the same way. They allow you to walk, and so a prosthetic leg is a leg, And so this is a flaw with functionalism because they don't want to go all out.
Well, this would be a rejection of just like formal reality and stuff.
It is, right, yes. And so
it's a focus on efficient reality, but
yes, and
it's efficient cause or whatever.
It's the function of its efficient reality, which is weird. Like it's like
that's almost weird. That's a weird.
Yes, it's almost going to the teleology, but then once you say that this is the only important part, you reject everything else. So in Aristotelian thought, a prosthetic leg remains a prosthetic leg because it doesn't have its material and formal reality intact. Mm-hmm. It has different material and formal reality, so it cannot be the same as a leg, even though its function is the same, its telos can be the same, but because it negates the other two realities, it cannot be the same thing. With functionalism, it wants to say that, well, they're rejecting materialism because materialism is only looking at efficient cause and material cause, and functionalism is saying I'm just going to look at this quasi, I guess, function of efficient cause and say this is what's important.
And whether or not that's an intentional deficiency, like a voluntary ignorance, or whether or not they're
I think it's cowardice, really.
Well, it's or it's like a frame of they lack the framework, depending. I think it would depend on who you.
I guess but most people that I discussed that are functionalists, when they got really pissed at me, it was because they don't want. They just don't want to go there.
Well, it's just a stubbornness.
Yes, it's stubbornness and cowardice. Yeah. It's like, no, you understand. I mean, to say that you can make this. I remember I was discussing with one guy says, yes, but we can make a computer that has a camera that has the same function as the eye. And then it has a motherboard which has a function of the brain. And so it is identical to the brain and the eye because it has the same function of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, no, because one is made of plastic and, metals and wires and electricity.
And there's the H word ending in morphic that we will talk about eventually. That you would
which it denies. And so in some way, functionalism at least acknowledges that there's something beyond matter and efficiency. Yeah. But it's stupid.
Yes.
It's a stupid form of...
It's a weird half
Yes,
attempt. Yeah. But so Feser, in his writing about all these things, he essentially articulates at the end of the chapter that these accounts of the way in which our minds function, we perceive reality or whatever, have to account for the it's just so beyond. This was the first time I'd ever encountered this idea.
Yeah.
And I think that this factor is, and I will say it, but this factor is one of the most important.
Yeah.
At least in how I understand it, of like, I don't even know how to say this. It's qualia. Is the next chapter. Yes. I remember texting Jeremy. I was following. I was like, okay. I was like, all right, perception. The gap between reality and the way we perceive it. Like, that's a problem. Okay, so Descartes had. Okay, so dualism. Okay, here's all these schools of dualism. Okay, materialism. And then when he started with qualia, I'm like, can I try to define? Oh, let me see how I wrote it. Let me see how I defined qualia.
In his lectures, he pronounces it qualia.
He has to stop. That can't happen.
Even though he pronounced quale correctly, for some reason it says qualia.
That sounds like an animal, almost.
Yeah.
Quill, like a porcupine. Qualia. Man, this is a rough listen for people. This is awesome. Okay, so qualia are it refers to the sensory experience of a thing. Like, what is qualia? Like, qualia would be like if I look at an apple, the redness that I experience in viewing the apple that my brain detects as red, that's qualia. Mm-hmm. What are qualia?
And so
maybe if I hear it defined for me correctly, like
it's really
because this is since the 1960s that this word has been started.
It has,
really used widely.
Yes, and it really, really hit stride in the 70s and 80s, and I think a lot of it is because
like Chalmers,
right? Chalmers is a big
advocate.
Yeah, and so the thing
David
is that
Chalmers,
the
Australian guy with the funky jacket.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's merely because once you say sensory experience, you go back to materialism.
So it's so difficult. It was okay. So for the listener,
so do you know Mary's room?
Yes, I will say. I'm just gonna let me provide a side note to the listener specifically, who likely has as much understanding of the nature of qualia now as I did when I started listening and reading to this thing. Qualia makes still very little sense to me.
Yeah.
So. What is it called? Is it just called Mary's room?
Mary's room or white room or whatever.
I want to see if
we normally just call it Mary's room in academia.
So this would have to do with the knowledge argument that it's essentially to deal with the it's almost like you can use it to distinguish what qualia is intuitively. Yes. So imagine that. In whatever year 2350 or whatever, that like we have scientifically and empirically and decoded everything about the physical reality or the physical constitution of the experience of color or whatever. Yeah. And there's this neuroscientist Mary that lives. There's two ways that you sent me a video. It was like 3.5 minutes. It was really dorky.
Yeah, I know.
That explained it.
I wish I found the other one.
They explained it two different ways. So either way that we want, if we want to use Feser's argument or whatever the argument from the video is, that this neuroscientist Mary understands potential. I mean, you can conceive of the fact it would be unlikely in real circumstances, but like she understands literally every single detail and aspect of the neurological reality of the way we experience color. Yeah. But she literally knows every single thing there is to know about how the brain interfaces with color neurologically. But she sees in black and white. So she can articulate all of the facts of the way that we interact with color. But she has never seen color. Yeah. And how Feser's absurd. I think that the way he articulates is that this woman Mary lives in a black and white room.
Yes, that's what it is, yeah.
And that she is wearing a black and white suit. Yeah. And that she's never seen her body because the body is colored. Yeah. Like this, she lives in an environment where color has been concealed from her, whether or not she can see it or whether or not it's an aspect of the people that have her there or of their design or whatever. Mary has never seen color. She's never experienced color. Yeah. But she knows all of the facts there are to know about it. What then can one say that if at one point Mary now can see the red roses, is that learning a new fact about color? Or is that simply like, what is that experience of color?
Yes,
obviously the experience of color would be a new thing introduced to Mary, who is an expert in the neurology of color or whatever. But what is the nature of the fact that she has just now experienced seeing color? Yeah. That's where qualia exists.
Yes, yeah.
That's what qualia is. It has to do with the experience of perceiving something.
Yes. And so I don't know if in the book he covers this after computational theory of the mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
But many times this is used for argumentation against a computation. So, for example, you have Photoshop, right? You have a computer, you have Photoshop. Now, Photoshop has Pantone, and so in its algorithm, it has all the information it needs to produce virtually any color possible or feasible for you to produce on the screen. In a computational or materialist theory of the mind, you would then have to conclude that your computer knows the color red. Like it knows the color red. It knows what the color red is. What the theory of qualia is saying is that that's an absurd statement, because the computer, even though can produce the color red, it has all the variables in its algorithm to kind of, make it happen or just display it, that it still does not know what the color red is.
You couldn't.
That it
requires programming by a person who knows what red is to display that.
It does, yes. And the only way that the person could program it is if he has qualia, that experience of redness. Is that without that, he can never...
Because qualia refers to sight, hearing, taste. It's the experience of perceiving and interpreting sensory input.
Yes.
So I think that he spends a little bit of time on it, but there's the qualia. So you and I sitting in this room, and this is something that I think I have heard this question. I have heard more people discuss than almost anything in this whole third of the book.
Yeah.
That how do I know when I see something I call red and you see something you call red and we agree is red? How do I know that what we are seeing, if I had your physical equipment and had the cones you have, how do I know that that's what red
that we're
is?
seeing the same
That's
thing.
a question of qualia.
Yes.
It's not that like you and I, like that bottle's blue, this thing's red, that's orange over there, my jacket's blue. We agree, but it's the nature of our qualia, our experience of those things that might the similarity of which is in question.
Yes,
That's what qualia is.
Yeah.
That's what to question the nature of qualia between individuals is that our actual experience of those things as they relate to us and not interdependently between people.
And so you cannot know any of those things unless you experience.
Because they're only first person.
Yes.
Qualia are only first.
Yeah.
That's another thing that Feser does is he's constantly distinguishing between this is a third person thing, this is a first person thing.
Right. Yeah,
and qualia are literally only knowable in the first person.
They are, yes.
You can't know the qualia of another person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
is qualia synonymous with perceptual experience?
Yeah, I think,
or like vaguely.
They are, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the another problem is that, like, what does it require to have qualia? Like, you can have literally what a zombie, technically speaking, is defined as the body of a person
sensational experience.
The sense is just the body of a person without perception.
Right, yes.
But
you need the perception. You need that cognitive mental process.
But can you say that, can you have a zombie is that which lacks qualia? Is essentially...
It would, yes.
Is that essentially... Could you say it's the definition of a zombie?
Not just of a zombie, but I guess even of other beasts.
Yes. I'm saying, like, if you have a human body... That's what a zombie is a human body without qualia.
Yes, yeah.
Because we are jumping around a little bit, and I'm trying to organize this. The qualia chapter was rough. I had to listen to it 3 times to start to really... Because you start to get into idealism.
Yes.
And stuff.
Right.
And, like, you really start to get out there with qualia.
Yeah.
Like, focusing on qualia itself as like a question to be answered.
Yeah. Well, I really do think that's why the way I normally synthesize like for my students is that you have to first begin with Cartesian dualism, and then one group saying that only one is real and the other group saying that the other is real. That's all that it really is. So idealism is saying that only the mental process is real. That they're
the opposite of materialists.
They're the opposite of materialists. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think I would prefer. I just think that's cooler.
Yeah. It gets crazy though.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
That literally, I have no notes.
Yeah,
I was listening to there's a whole section on idealism, the different schools of idealism, and I was like, I'm just gonna listen to like the sounds coming out of the speakers, and I'm just gonna let it wash over me until eventually I understand this. Hopefully, but
I mean, in some ways, some of the hot topics of today incorporate some of idealistic ideas.
Well, they'd have to.
Yeah, because the
trans movement was
it's basically saying that you can instantiate reality from your mind.
Yes.
So your mind is the instantiator.
But nothing exists beyond it.
Then nothing exists, yeah.
But I think the argument against... So is this essentially... Is idealism based most fundamentally on qualia? Because the discussion was going back and forth between qualia and idealism a lot.
Right.
It's essentially that reality is based on your experience of perception.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that qualia are only subjective, and therefore can only be observed objectively to like only a certain degree.
Yeah.
So really basing a school of metaphysics on that, or a philosophy of mind or whatever, epistemology or whatever, is not, you can't really say anything about it because you can only know your own.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, in a world where everybody wants to be their own god, like that would make sense that would be enough for.
Yeah, and I think really that's all that you end up doing.
This is you become God.
Yeah. It's because once you eliminate reality that can be instantiated,
of which you partake or whatever, whatever.
Yeah, you become God, or you start going to phenomenology. You start becoming a little.
Which
more,
is a weird half.
It is, yeah.
Attempt to bridge the two.
You start getting into Heideggerian or Husserlian thought because it's just like you're.
We have to cover. Can we just cover being in time sometime?
Yeah.
I'm committing to us. This is going to be this whole season is going to be like this.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to commit us to all these different things. But he starts to get into property dualism. Do you know?
How did you define that one?
I didn't write it. I didn't even understand. Agnostic materialism is like. So this is how he defined agnostic materialism, which is a form of property dualism, I guess, is that it's contrary to Cartesian dualism in that there's only one material substance, but that it has physical and non-physical properties, which starts to sound like ancients, but
okay.
But it does so in a way that attempts to be material.
Yeah.
And again, I am not equipped. There are going to be sections of these notes where I'm just going to be like, we just have to say, he mentioned this thing. If you're interested, go read that. Because they're just so... Yeah. He does a good job of articulating it, but they're so nonsensical that in any kind of colloquial sense, I would not be able to articulate it at all. Based on my own understanding. But again, he kept saying epiphenomenalism and presenting it as a problem to all these theories that like, you have this theory, but okay, you are saying that this theory is material in nature. But making this argument would lead you to some sort of epiphenomenalism that like you are begging the question in a way that like you have to explain that which is it supervenial is the word?
Maybe, yeah.
Is supervenial over whatever thing you're discussing.
I mean, the biggest issue with materialism and idealism in general is that you just, when you begin to only say there is one reality and you exclude the other, is that, I think we talked about this earlier on. You go back to the pre-Socratics where
Yeah.
Where then you're just not wanting to explain the phenomena that you're experiencing.
Or discarding it.
Yeah,
saying it's not relevant.
It's not relevant, it's not real. It's like, well, but that's stupid, right?
Anyone who experiences anything would probably tell you just as like a common sense.
Yeah, no, this is
on
real.
grounds of common sense. This is
There's
real.
something that is happening here, and this needs a description. So that to simply excuse it as you know, the illusory card. It's like, okay, well, that's an insufficient, because even if it's an illusion, I'm still living in the illusion. So what is this illusion that I'm living in? And so it's yeah.
So we're just going to skip to the next chap. So I don't know how much we just said about qualia.
Yeah.
It's hard to, because a lot of the times in the book, he'll say qualia, but say that this person I'm attributing this idea to would never have actually said qualia, but this is kind of what they meant.
Yeah.
So first we start with perception, that moves into Descartes attempted in the modern era to explain the gap between perception and reality with dualism. Then he moves into material arguments against the existence or reality, however you want to say it, of things beyond the material that we can observe. And then he moves into, okay, but how does that account for consciousness?
Right.
So chapter 5, after chapter 4 qualia, is consciousness.
Yes.
And he immediately starts talking about eliminativism.
Yes. Yeah.
So eliminativism in philosophy of mind, it's any school of metaphysical thought at all, is that if you can't account for a phenomenon or an idea, or an idea or whatever by material means, just eliminate it.
Yes, yeah.
Because you can't explain it in your own framework, so it must not be real because I can't use the framework that I'm employing to explain it.
Yeah. So many times, this is why I said this is just taking materialism to its logical end. And so something like sadness doesn't exist because that's not material. What's material are like chemicals in your brain, whether you have deficiency or
the fact
excess.
that you can even call it sadness would be inaccurate in this
framework. It would be,
because it doesn't describe anything.
Yeah, you would say
epiphenomenal is the word that...
yes, exactly, yeah.
What was it?
Like serotonin levels of your brain.
He actually makes the point much later on that if eliminativists would enjoy that, instead of saying, oh, I'm sad right now, you would just say like, oh, my serotonin levels are blah, 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 are low now because this firing is like, you just describe your emotions as like chemical processes out loud.
Yes, that's what he says.
To each other.
Yeah. And that's not just him saying, like Paul and Pat, who are like a husband and wife duo, I think professors at Stanford, are they? I can't remember.
What were their names?
Paul and Patricia. I always remember the first names. I can't remember the last names.
He actually references them specifically.
Yeah. And
I don't remember their last names.
Yeah.
I didn't wrate them down. I just this whole part I was like,
but
I understand.
They wrote an entire thesis on this, and you know how they wrote this entire sentence. Like it sounded the most absurd thing I ever read. You know, it's like your wife come home from work and be like, "How are you doing?" My serotonin levels are low, so I need some glass of wine to raise it up a little bit. It's like, what the fuck are they talking about? You guys are talking like retards. Because like anger, sadness, happiness, none of these things refer to physical things, right? There is no physical relation to sadness. But the word...
insofar as we conceive of sadness. It's not physical.
Yeah. And so the way that they're going back to words and meaning and semantics is that words can only refer to material things.
Because I would obviously... in the context of our understanding of how the brain works, I would say when I am sad, the chemicals in my brain might fluctuate.
Yes.
But that is not itself sadness.
Yes, yeah.
Because that doesn't account for my experience of it.
Yeah.
But he does move quickly into Russell's thought.
Yeah.
He doesn't specifically reference those guys until way later.
Okay, yeah.
he goes into, he calls it, there's a section on Russellian identity theory and neutral monism, monism or whatever. And this is when he starts talking about idealism.
Yeah.
Because Russell was not an idealist, obviously.
Right, yeah.
He was a materialist. What was the school of thought you attributed to
Kind
Russell?
of. I mean, he was, like, a lot of people attribute, like, the father of what we find with a lot of modern, at least contemporary materialists like Dawkins and Dene and everything.
Russell's their guy.
Yeah, Russell normally is their guy, but I guess if you really were to read Russell honestly, Russell and Wittgenstein is going to have a lot more in common. And they're analytical philosophers.
Wittgenstein the Protestant guy? No.
I don't know if he was Protestant. He was German, but I don't know what his religion actually was. I think he actually was Catholic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, so Wittgenstein and Russell they were kind of, so in the early modern period, and Foucault rejects a lot of this too, but the early modern period
which is something you like about him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was so entrenched with materialism that the only things that really exist were material things. It wasn't so much that Russell wanted to go completely against this, but he didn't believe, I guess, that a mathematical and mechanical understanding of matter was sufficient to describe the world. Is that there were relations between material things, there were relations between objects that gives a more fuller explanation. So so you would have, as many of these writers would say, what it was like states of affairs, and so
yes, he says that a lot.
Yes, and so the world.
Feser does in the book.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the world, in a materialist point of view, was the world is the earth. Mm-hmm. Like when you say the world, you refer to the rocks, the water, you refer to the earth. Mm-hmm. While Russell and Wittgenstein say that, well, no, the world is not the physical components of the world, of the earth. Rather, the world are the states of affairs in which these objects relate to one another. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where the development of the Russellian nominalism begins to develop. It wasn't like an eliminativist idea, nor was it necessarily a completely materialist idea, but it was one where he wanted to reject like the older world, the scholastic world of theology, while rejecting the modernism, pure mechanical and computational theories of reality, and say that it's really the relation between matter and form.
So this is what Feser says about Russell's ideas.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, just argumentatively was the most confusing part, because he would bounce between Russell's ideas and Chalmers' issues with Russell's ideas, back and forth, sentence to sentence. And be like, if I miss one sentence, I'm not going to remember what anything. But Russell's thought, I don't know if it begins with him, but it's also the label neutral monism is often monism.
Monism, yeah.
Monism.
Yeah.
Monism is attributed to him because it's monism, as in that everything consists of something of the same substance, but neutral because it's between physical and non-physical.
Yes, yeah. It's really the relation, and so like he hated idealism. Like the one thing that you could really say about Russell was his, like, he hated Hegel. He didn't like any of the kind of philosophy that derived from more of an idealistic worldview. That he many times he called his view common sense, and so
so arrogant.
Yes, and so like his common
That's
sense,
so amazing.
His common sense ideas was like, we shouldn't begin to investigate things that are unknowable, and so some of the things that are unknowable for him would be issues of metaphysics. Like, we shouldn't begin to question being qua being. Rather, we should simply begin with being as a brute fact, and that we understand that things exist as brute facts, and from there we can begin to use logic and reason to unpack the brute facts that exist.
Is that a phrase he used all the time?
Brute facts, yeah.
Because I know that he used facts all the time.
Yes. So a brute fact was basically like the end of what can be known. And so you reach a certain point.
But he would not have wanted to call that what we would call that.
Yeah, he wouldn't want to. Right?
God.
Yes. He would say, no, it's just a brute fact. And so as a brute fact, the things exist. Fine. This is something that we know. And so if things exist, we can begin to discover how they exist, but we will never understand why they exist.
Talking to you, Mike, just a little bit more. Sorry.
So for him, we will never understand why it exists. He said this is a common sense understanding of reality.
That's very wishy-washy.
And yes, it is.
Okay.
And so that's why it's hard, even though a lot of materialists like him, it's hard to say that he's simply a materialist, even though he kind of started that trend of like the contemporary atheists. He himself, I think, like he didn't even constitute himself as atheist. I believe he said that he withholds judgment.
You said he suspends his belief.
Suspends belief on any questions of God. Like he says, that's not something that he could ever come to know with reason. So he just suspends.
So it's essentially a Jordan Peterson criticism. Is he does a similar thing?
Yes.
The fact is, if there is God,
he doesn't want to do that.
But he doesn't want to.
Yeah, Russell wouldn't even go that far. Russell would say that any even articulation of God is already going too far. Just begin with a brute fact that things exist. We don't have to understand being. We don't have to understand participation.
So he just insulated himself against.
Yes. So there's just things that exist. Fine. Now that things exist, what can we say about it? What can we know about it? But you can never reference being. You can never reference God. You can never reference reality per se. There's only things that are existing.
Well, it almost sounds like it's not that you shouldn't. It's that it's not that you can't. It's that you ought not.
In the end, you ought not because you cannot. Is that he says that reason will never take you there. If you're a Christian, it's merely based on faith. It can never be based on knowledge. It can never be based on reason. You're just wanting to believe that.
This is very weird.
And if you're wanting to believe that, that's fine.
It's a very half-baked feeling. But anyway.
Yeah. And that's the Russellian worldview in a nutshell. So the mind is not simply material. Nor is it ideal, but it's simply a state of affair of reality. It's a brute fact.
What do you... So in this, Feser would talk about Russell's concept of introspection. Mm-hmm. What do you... It's apparently specific to Russell, that like we can understand the intrinsic nature of the brain just by thinking about just by introspecting and thinking about it.
Right, yeah.
Just by introspecting regarding the experiences we have thinking.
Yes, because you're no longer trying to comprehend what the mind is.
Or partakes of. You're just understanding the nature of your own experience.
Yes.
And that constitutes the mind.
Yes. Yeah.
So then Feser, and I don't know if he attributes this to a specific, I don't know if he said something about, it wasn't about Chalmers.
Yeah.
This is the part where he starts naming people like crazy.
Yeah.
And where I wish I'd actually been reading it, because I feel like I'm just seeing the shape of the name and I might remember better. Yeah. That if that is the case, if that is to actually fully understand the mind, all you have to do is introspect and observe your experiences of it. That would mean that the mind is qualia. That consists of qualia only.
Yes, yeah.
And then he bridges. I had to listen to this argument like 6 times, so I hope I'm synthesizing it right in how he said it. But that if that is the case, and the world is material, if you have a Russellian materialist or something, that means that if you can understand the mind most fully by observing and understanding your qualia alone, that means the brain, if the world is material, meaning it consists of only one substance, the brain must itself consist of qualia as a substance. And if the brain is material by their definition, the brain must consist of the same kind of matter that everything else exists of which everything else is constituted. Therefore, everything must be qualia.
Yes, yeah.
So that is the point at which I was just like, shoot me through the head. Like he starts to go, he goes from there to further arguments. I was like...
No, I think you articulated it well, though.
And then there's the problem of the binding problem. Like, what binds qualia together at all?
Yeah. Like, why isn't it simply chaos?
Yes, like what is the thing that binds all of these...
Yes.
For the listener, what that would mean. So if I'm going to translate this better, and I think this is the only argument I listen to over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So I think this is the only one I'm actually equipped to articulate that if you can most fully know, if you can come to fully know the nature of the mind as in its relationship with the brain also, because it's material. If the mind is material and you can fully come to know it best through observing the nature of your qualia, so observing your own experience, then the brain must consist of qualia, because there's only one substance if the world is material. And if you are observing qualia is the best way that you can, because materialism is scientific. So you can only come to know things through observation.
Yes.
Through through
like a mechanical observation.
Through inductive reasoning. So if you can best understand the brain by inductively reasoning from your observation of qualia, its nature, it must consist of qualia. And if the brain is material, it must consist of everything else. It must consist of the same substance of which everything else consists, because there's only one. Then everything else must exist of qualia. That means that this table exists of the experience of sensory perception.
Yes.
And that, which I don't know what that would lead you to, like theologically or like religion wise, where you would go with that. I don't know if Buddhism would be in line with that or something. Like, it just starts to sound very Eastern. Like, this wine bottle most fundamentally consists of the experience of sensory perception.
Right, yes.
I just don't even...
and
I just don't even know what there is to say about that. Because it's so far, it's the farthest beyond my understanding of the way the world works. Of anything he articulated before this. This is when I was texting you. And I was like, Jeremy, I don't know how to get through this chapter.
And I think there's a reason why during this time period is also the development of quantum mechanics, because in the end, that's what they're saying, right? That the placement, like the... what was it? The double slit experiment they did in physics, where they shone the light between the two slits, and then from the other end, they could, I guess, measure the photons of light that comes in there, and that they were unable to detect the placement of electrons without an observer. So once an observer looked at it, they could then detect the electrons, but without an observer, it's undetectable. It is here, there, nowhere, and everywhere at the same time. That didn't make sense. So much of this type of theory also bled into many of the the workings of physics. Is that saying, well, in the end,
because physics is dependent on metaphysics.
Yes,
which was something that could take an entire episode.
It will, yeah. But that in the end, the placement of electrons is dependent on the observer of its placement. And so yes, that the qualia of its placement is what makes it be there at all.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Just
you're saying it like that. Just like, okay.
Yes.
That does loop it. That does.
It's weird. It's weird that
But the fact that you worded it like that just kind of like brought it full circle with everything we were talking about before. But or with everything that I read in this that I don't even know how good of a job I am doing like, articulating what we read. But from this, he's very, very good at moving from this question to this question. In a way, I don't know if I could ever be that. Like he goes from the question of qualia and its relationship to the relationship between immaterial and material substances that Russell would have articulated, and the thing about, with the idealism thing. Okay, so what does that mean thought is?
Yes, yeah.
And I just like, it's the thought. So the thought chapter made a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to just really, really basic A equals B, so B equals C.
Yeah.
From the consciousness chapter, which is, he spends a lot of time on Russell for the consciousness chapter. And I don't know if that's just because he's the most influential thinker in that school, in that.
At least for modern times,
I guess he is.
Yeah.
He's one of the guys.
Yeah. I would say Chalmers.
Like I know, like Sam Harris is a huge Russell Bertrand guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he definitely
Bertrand
is.
Russell, not Russell Bertrand. Bertrand Russell.
A lot of the new atheists are. I mean, they still hail him as being a significant figure for their school of thought.
Because he kind of begins with a. Because what? So if everything is material and you can explain the mind materially, there can only be causes.
Yeah.
There is no reason.
Right, yeah.
Because the reason for something and the cause of something are different things.
Yeah, yeah.
Which he goes into great depth explaining, but there is no if everything is material and if all functions of the mind are reducible to synapses firing in the brain or whatever, there's only causal relationship between that which we call the mind and the body.
Right, yeah.
Because it's just the complex system of behaviors that's been imposed on you, or however we want to say it. He was contemporary with behaviorists. He's not a behaviorist, but he's contemporary with them, or whatever. But my thought that this is a glass is only caused by my sensing with my eyes that this is the thing that I've been programmed to believe is a glass, or whatever, and then it triggers that neural portion of my brain that's been trained to behave as if this is a glass, to recognize that that's a glass, and then that neuron fires to this neuron, and then I pick up the glass because my brain has been trained to know what to do with this. None of that is reason for that.
Right, yeah, they're causal.
They're just, the relationship between me and the glass is only causal.
Yeah. Anything
I would do with the glass is the relationship between me and any action I might take in regards to the glass is causal.
Yes, yeah.
But then there's reason. The reason for something is that which I have rationally conceived of to do with the glass. It's not that because if you were to say the reason I picked the glass up is that I understand what to do with the glass, that's different than
the causal connection between the synapses.
My visual sensing of the glass fired the synapses in my brain to pick the glass up because I've been trained to do that.
Yes,
that's a totally different thing.
Yes.
Because if I were to say, like you and I would both say that this glass, I know what to do with this glass because I have reasoned that this glass has a certain teleology, whether or not it's natural or imparted by man or whatever.
It's a wine glass.
It's a wine glass. Yeah. So when I see a table, I know what to do with a table because I understand rationally what a table is, not because my brain has been coincidentally programmed to understand what a table is by my conditioning. So he goes into, so what does he say? Something like he says, blah, blah, blah name. I don't know who he says. Mark will say, stubs his toe. The cause for his scream in instinct might be that his body reacted in a causal fashion and in a neurological fashion to the damage done to his toe, and then that shot a signal to the brain to make a noise or whatever, or whatever. That's cause.
Yeah.
If someone shoots you, you go like this in your chest because it's just a neurological, it's just a a reaction your body has.
Yeah.
But then when Mark goes to take his shoe off to assess the damage, that's not causal, because he understands that the best way to rationally assess the damage done to his toe by stubbing it is to take his shoe off.
Right. Yeah.
You can't assume that what do you have to say about that?
Nothing. No.
Like, it's like, you can't assume that the understanding of what to do given an unlimited amount, you could just scream. A dog would just scream.
Right, yeah.
And not know what to do.
Yes, yeah.
Like a fox gets his foot trapped and just chews its foot off.
Yes.
Because it's only instinct is survival. A person might not do that. They might assess their situation.
Yeah.
And given an infinite amount of options, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
For courses of action, analyze those things rationally.
Yeah.
And decide through reason what the best thing to do is.
Yes, yeah.
The reason I change lanes on the highway is I want to go faster.
Mm-hmm. The
cause of me doing it is that I decided through reason I wanted to do that, and then the cause is just whatever functions my body as a corporeal substance.
Yeah.
Just the processes it needed to actuate or what it needed to do to actuate the action of doing it.
Yeah. And a material view of the mind it just completely eliminates reason.
Yes.
It just does. And the problem with that is that there's an insufficient explanation of people's behavior then.
Yeah. You
cannot merely it's not really an explanation. It's like so if you go to a murder trial, right? And then they will ask you, why did you kill this person? And we need a motive. And then the lawyer said, well, at the moment he had synapses in his brain to flex his arms so that he would raise it up and grip a knife and then plummet it through her chest 20 times. And then he just gives a detailed description of the physical components of what was needed for stabbing somebody 20 times. But that is not in any way giving you the reason why he stabbed her. That is, it's just not.
Because the second you say he wanted to do something.
Yes.
That's not.
Yeah.
Materially explicable.
You cannot explain a person's actions merely with material explanations.
Because actions only human? Can only humans execute actions?
No, anything could have actions, but to have like a rational, intelligent motive for
an action with intentionality.
That's going to be...
Well, intentionality applies only to the mind, but...
Yeah. But what I mean is like to have that kind of motive is only human. Animalistic instincts...
Well, because to say I want something is to recognize that which is not all that could be.
Yes.
In a rational way.
Right, and that there's going to be more... It just doesn't answer the question. That's the main thing. Yeah. It doesn't answer the question of why. So either you have to eliminate that question altogether and be like, there never is motive because all there is synapses of the brain. Or you would say, which then you pull out the illusory card at that point and be like, haha, there is no actual mental process that determines one's motives or reasons why they do something. But again, that just, it's stupid. I don't know what to say. I was like, no, that's dumb. Nobody... like, to go back to some of our previous episodes last season, this is what bothers me about historicism, because historicism does the same thing.
This is specifically in reference to the episode on Foucault.
Yes, Foucault, and also Qualia.
If anyone who wants to re-listen to that or whatever,
yes,
like, hear your
is that both of them want to give you a historical contextual explanation of something, whether it is about the beautiful or the beautiful boy or the manifestations of artwork within a beautiful. They never actually give you the reason why.
Because that's only efficient cause.
It is, yes. So they're going to give you all the particulars. I mean,
efficient and substantial cause, material cause.
Efficient and material cause. And you could write thousands of pages on all those things, and you could read those thousands of pages and still, in the end, say, "But why?"
Require final cause.
Yes, it's an insufficient explanation. So what he is saying there is the same thing: is that you could give all the complex description of what the brain did in order for one to stab somebody 150 times. But it would never answer the question why. What was the reason that they have done that? What is the reason why any behavior is done?
This is kind of where he starts introducing CRTT, computational represent.
Yeah.
What is it? Computational.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? It's not computational representational. It's
computational theory of the mind. Normally people say, but I don't know what he's.
It's CRTT. So
Okay.
Computationally representative theory of thought or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Whatever. Because I mean, I this starts to get into like Turing. What's his first name?
Yes. Yeah. Turing. Oh, the first name I don't know. The Turing machine.
The gay one.
Yeah.
Didn't they execute him for being like doing homo stuff?
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, he got like sentenced to death for homo stuff.
I did not know that. Yeah.
Or no, maybe not that. Maybe be wrong. He was famously, privately a gay guy, and something bad happened.
That was publicly known.
Yeah. Well, it is now. Like everybody knows. Like, oh, during like dudes. And to be boned by dudes or bone dudes. No, I don't know. And something bad happened to him because of that. But he contrasts it with the argument from reason. Do you know what that is?
What does he say now?
He starts to use. One second. I was using a lot of this while I was driving. So it says, if thoughts do not have any causal relationship, but it spells it COCZLE. I'm trying to think of exactly how he characterizes this. He uses an example of in this framework. It's talking about how, so you should just for me really quick, so that I can springboard off of what you're saying, because you're going to do this better right now. Explain the computational theory of mind.
Okay. So the computational theory of the mind is that just like a computer, that our mind is nothing more than computing algorithms, and algorithms that we compute are ones that are.
And this is essentially a result of the work of computer scientists.
Yes, yeah.
From Turing on. People before Turing and stuff.
Yeah. And so you have inputs, and then you with the inputs you compute whatever the inputs are. And so with computers, you have the programs, the what is it called? The software, whatever it is, the algorithms put in there, so then it gives you an output of what those are. And so for us, our inputs are our experiences. And so we see things, we were told things, we read, we do whatever. And all this stuff is simply information that we get into our brain or into our mind. And so when we get on the information in our mind, we could compute those things, and we come up with different argumentations, and we develop it, and so on and so forth. That the mind is nothing more than just an organic computer, basically. And that if you have an organic computer, just like a computer has its algorithms,
or that computers are material minds,
or
mechanical minds,
or that,
which is definitely the Turing. But he has this. He says something. He gives this argument, or he gives a counter argument, or he describes something. I don't remember exactly where this is in context. I thought it was interesting that if you have a calculator, and you're punching in numbers and calculating. Let me see exactly.
The Chinese room is also a counter to this, if you want.
Yes. So actually, we could just go to that, because I think he uses the calculator argument a little bit later. But so the Chinese is the Chinese. Could you say the Chinese room argument is an elaboration of the Turing test?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Turing test, which I think comes after this, but I think we can just present earlier, is that a computer passes the Turing test if its computational ability, if you have a person communicating a conversation between a person and a computer, if there comes a point at which the computer, through whatever learning algorithms or whatever, can learn to communicate, not communicate, what maybe would be the word? Communicate. Communicate's the right word.
Yeah.
You'd use that for animals, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not express. Communicate.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew there was a different one or two.
Yeah.
one word I wanted to use for this. So if the computer can learn algorithmically to communicate linguistically, maybe not linguistically, but linguistically with the person in a way that is indistinguishable from the human counterpart, then it is said to pass the Turing test and be said to be thinking.
Yeah.
So if you sit down with a computer, like an AI bot, and a person, and you don't know which is which, and you're getting responses back and forth, and there's just conceivably a point at which the computer could learn, quote unquote, to communicate exactly as the human does, or with the same eloquence or whatever. At that point, the computer can be said to be thinking.
Yes. Yeah.
But the Chinese room argument is that you have a guy in a room who speaks only English. Yeah. And is presented with, how many characters are there in Chinese? It's like...
There's like 300 something? Or?
No.
Oh, no?
There's thousands.
There's thousands?
So in Japanese, there's 2,145 Chinese characters. In Chinese, I think there's over 10,000 characters. Yeah. So let's just say that this guy has access to all Chinese characters that a fluent Chinese person would utilize in regular speech or writing or whatever, or sound. Or it would have to, it's just writing. Yeah. But if just all Chinese characters that a native speaker would use or whatever, and he is someone outside the room, a Chinese speaker only or whatever, submits a question written in Chinese to the English speaker. And he has no idea what it says because it's in Chinese, but he's told by someone else that does understand what characters to put in what order to answer the question accurately. Yeah. And over time, this person is trained conceivably, probably not realistically, but conceivably to such a high degree of proficiency, matching his set of characters in response to the set of input characters submitted to him, that the people outside the room cannot tell he's not fluent in Chinese. Yes, yeah. But he doesn't understand a word of Chinese. Yes, yeah. That's what a computer does.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
There's no point. Did I articulate that well enough? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like at some, and I think that you and I would say that obviously he doesn't understand Chinese.
Right, yes.
There are many materialists and computational scientists who would say that there is no reason you can't say he doesn't understand Chinese.
Yes, exactly.
Which is to completely reject meaning in language. But, it's because it's not that he understands anything he's responding with or being submitted. It's that he can see the arbitrary shapes of the characters in Chinese and match those with... I think so. So there's one thing learning a language like Mandarin Chinese and being fluent in it. There's another thing that is literally learning to arbitrarily match the shapes of any of 10,000 different characters without understanding what any of them mean. Yeah. This is the highest IQ individual of all time to do this without any meaning. But that does none of this.
He's an autist at that point.
But then there's the argument that with the Chinese argument or the Chinese room argument, that can the whole system itself be said to understand Chinese? Yeah. Of the door in the room he's in and the characters he's using, the table or whatever, and the guide telling him what to respond with, all of that. Like, can one say that the whole system understands? Right. Yeah. Because then you could say he's not the computer; it's the whole system that's the computer. Yeah. Can that whole system understand Chinese? Right. Yeah. You and I would say no. But,
of course not. Yeah.
But that expands the question a bit.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because from from the computational theory of the mind, you're kind of already forced to say, yes, he does know Chinese then. He knows Mandarin if he's already doing that, because it's just, again, it's just about inputs and output. And
then, so is it Jerry Fodor?
I can't remember, yeah.
You know his last name?
Yeah, no.
Okay, so Jerry Fodor. I think it's Jerry Fodor.
Yeah.
I'm writing all these last names. I should have written first names, so if people are interested, they can look it up. But
yeah.
I think it's Jerry Fodor. His argument against that, which I think is just something we've already just said, with just you and I laughing and knowing what we think. But he would essentially say that proponents of the computational theory of the mind have no reason to believe or think, however one might want to say it. They have no reason to believe that their theory has anything to say about how those symbols come to have meaning.
Right.
It only accounts for the way that rationally we move from one idea to the other.
Yeah.
It only has the kind of the form of logic, but not the content.
Yes, yeah. And a large part of that just because computer science, computer theory is based on Boolean logic. And with Boolean logic, it's only syntactical. It's not semantical at all. And so
which means that it's
void of meaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
What does syntactical mean?
It's a structure.
Yeah.
Structure, the way sentences are formed, propositions are formed, and arguments are formed.
But they need not have meaning.
They have no meaning.
Well, it would say that once these algorithmic sentences, quote unquote, are complex enough, they need not have meaning.
Even a simple one, it wouldn't have meaning in a Boolean sense, because in a Boolean logic, you're only looking at the syntax, because for George Boole, all sentences were equally as meaningless, because there was no meaning in words in themselves. There are no real reference to words. And so with that, what is left for you is simply contradictions and non-contradictions. And so every other form of, syllogism, like a categorical syllogism presented to you, like there wouldn't be any immediate...
Well, there's just no such thing as a syllogism.
No, there would be, but the only ones would be in terms of contradiction. But there wouldn't be contrary, subcontrary,
well, and I think that the interesting thing, that I'm not necessarily saying that this is correct, but if you really think that's true, if that a logical argument can be posited without any meaning per se, why can't it be ones and zeros? Yeah,
that's the thing. That's how they came up with computer science. And so since there's only contradiction and non-contradiction, so you have ones, which is a non-contradiction, and a zero, which is a contradiction. And so
this is almost Russellian, because it's like you can just understand that which is and which isn't. It doesn't matter why or how.
Right, yes.
They just are or are not.
Yeah.
You can just make whatever you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's all of computer science is based on those principles.
Because then they started to get into, I don't know if this is an idealist thing. I wish I remembered who had said this. It really is it is Jerry Fodor. I knew I wrote his first name somewhere, but it's not, this isn't Fodor.
Yeah.
It's not, and I don't remember how this tied in 100%, but this was essentially a response that, like, because you're talking about a computer doing computing, and then eventually people came along and they were like, you can't actually say that the computer itself is computing.
Yes, yeah.
Because
the computer knows nothing.
Yeah, it's like if you were using a calculator, you are the one doing the computing.
Right, yeah.
On a calculator, you are the one calculating because without...
Well, at least you're the one that put in the inputs, though.
Well, the numbers on the screen inherently don't represent anything unless we use them to refer to reality. Like a 2 doesn't have to look like a 2.
Right, yeah, it doesn't.
It's just that the 2, the way we write 2 itself is arbitrary and meaningless unless we utilize it to refer to something. So they were making the argument that a calculator itself has no meaning.
Right.
The symbols that come up on the calculator have this electrical impulse signals between the different diodes or whatever have no meaning. It's when we use it, it is a calculator essentially.
Yeah.
They were saying they used this to say that things do not have nature unless we impart it to it.
Right. Yes.
That we use them that way.
And the thing about idealism is that Again, I'm always going to present it as both because they are they're the counterpart of each other. And so when you have materialism can never really fully, I guess, explicate or allow you to comprehend the full nature of the mind or whatever happens, because it's only a part of it. And I would say with idealism is the same thing, because in this way, it is true that the symbols that are being presented are arbitrary. Mm-hmm. They're meaningless inherently. They're only meaningful because we have deemed it as meaningful. Like when we write these symbols, it means something to us, and so they're referring to something that is meaningful. And so in some way, you could kind of see both almost like that they're both getting partly true. Mm-hmm. That even though the truth that is being expressed with the Arabic symbols that we use for numbers are not arbitrary, the actual symbol, the Arabic symbols that we use for numbers is arbitrary. But because they don't want to go far enough, they're simply saying, therefore, we're imparting, like as if we are God, we are imparting the meaning, and we are allowing this to not be arbitrary anymore.
Well, it's not that we're imparting the meaning, it's that we're
instantiating.
The meaning is derived from us, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we kind of give ourselves instantiating power in that way.
Yeah.
That we say,
we attribute the meaning to something,
yes,
but we don't. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then he does move into chapter 7. So what?
Yeah.
I want to keep... So we go from thought, chapter 6. So we go qualia, chapter 4, consciousness, chapter 5, into thought in 6th. Mm-hmm. And then we move into chapter 7, which is intentionality.
Yes, yeah.
And how, like how I said earlier, computational theories in the mind do not account for intentionality at all. They would reject it, probably.
Yes, yeah.
And then in intentionality... I don't think that people use the word intention 100% correctly in a philosophical sense.
Right, yeah.
Because it just means to aim at something or refer to something.
Yes, yeah.
So could you say, like the letter R intends like the sound.
Right, yes, yeah.
Because it doesn't necessarily have as much, it's not necessarily desire, even though desire has intentionality.
Right, yeah. It's not referring to that. It's just simply,
it's not, yeah.
Yeah, intentionality means that there's a directedness towards thought. Mm-hmm. That the thought is about something. That you never really have a thought that is isolated in itself, that is not about anything. It's always about something, so it's a directed thing.
And then he starts referencing, is it Thomas Searle?
Searle? I know Searle. I don't know his first name.
Okay, so
but Searle is a very popular philosopher. If you just say Searle,
what's Searle's hypothesis of the background?
Of the background?
It's literally a thing that.
Yeah. Oh, what is he? What kind of notes did you put on there?
Let me. Again, this is Searle background. I wonder if I can just get this, because this was one that I had to listen to several times. It's like. Okay, so I am Googling it, and apparently background of meaning, background of communication, background. He had this... I'm going to assume the way that it was explained in the book and the way that I'm seeing it here, it's a theory of a background of network of causal relationships between everything that would lead to intentionality.
Oh, okay.
What do you know about
Searle? So like an interconnectedness?
Yeah. What do you know? What do you know about Searle? Do you know?
I'm not a specialist in Searle at all. Okay. Yeah, I've read a few.
Because he's more recent.
Yeah, I mean, I read some of his work, but
Let me see if I can kind of.
Yeah.
It's American philosopher. Blah 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 blah.
I think it was John. Isn't it John Searle?
I think it is John. It is John. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, he does a lot in linguistic. Intentionality and the background. An essay in the philosophy of mind is literally something he reads. For Searle, intentionality is exclusively mental, being the power of minds to represent or symbolize over things, properties, and states of affairs in the external world states of affairs.
Yeah.
Causal, covariance, aboutness, and the like are not enough. Yeah, so it's essentially, I think it's like a contemporary reintroduction of intentionality in idealist terms, I think.
Yeah. I mean, most likely...
he says action is only action insofar as it has intentionality. If something is not intentional, then it's not an action. It's just something caused to a thing.
Right, yeah, because an action is always going to require that directedness towards something.
Yes.
And so if you're not directed towards anything, and then you're being passive in whatever's happening.
So the example that Feser uses was... if you wave your hand at a friend to greet them, that's an action. But if you randomly have a seizure and your hands happen to be waving, it's not an action in the same way.
Yeah. Okay.
Which obviously I don't think is actually true. But,
yeah. Like, I mean, if you're having a seizure, it is different than flagging somebody down.
He kept talking about like theory of the background, and it was very nebulous.
Okay, yeah.
It didn't make a lot of sense. It's one of those that I'm like, I don't really know how to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's a section
where
we move from intention. It's just kind of like random intentionality.
Yeah. Because I'm not too much of an expert on
it. Almost tries to like materialize intentionality.
Yeah.
I think would be... in its causal relationship, but then he does move into causal theories of action.
Right.
So this is not exactly how he says it, but his example of like a causal relationship between a thought and because causal, to say that your thoughts have only causal relationships to things, or the body or the world, is to say that they are only caused by phenomena that occur to you.
Okay, yeah.
Or that they're like, again, there's no reason for anything. It's just causal.
Yeah.
So you're thinking that cat is on the mat does not primarily consist of your belief that it is there.
Yeah.
But that the primary cause of that thought is that the cat is on the mat, and that thoughts are primarily caused.
Right, yeah.
Is that...
No, yeah, that's a good...
but then... Because he starts going into like wide content versus narrow content in causal theories of the mind.
Yeah.
Is this not a place where you're super familiar?
Not too much, yeah.
Okay, so this is the grant. The grant?
Yeah.
I'm going to try this. So there's externalist theories of causal theories of the mind.
Yeah.
And then there's internalist.
Oh, yeah, I do know about this. Yes.
Yeah.
No, keep reading what you wrote, though.
So external theories of causal relationship, or the mind's causal relationship with reality, is that thoughts are caused by external phenomena that occur to you. And then narrow concept, which I guess is, you know what conceptual role theory is?
Conceptual role theory, no.
I really think we're getting into a time frame that's really, really recent.
No, it is, yeah.
So we're talking
but externalism and internalism, I definitely did a lot of research on, in some of my classes.
The internalism focuses on the causal relationship between mental states more than the external.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about?
No, that's pretty much the synthesis, and it really is in this way almost a reformation of the same dualism in the end of the day. Because
the problem, what Feser was saying, I don't mean to steal this from you, but I'm just going to word it like he said, is that the problem with thoughts being primarily causally related to reality is that how do you know what's causing them is reliable? How do you know your thoughts are accurate? Like if you're in a room, so if your thought that a cat is sitting there is primarily just present because it is caused by the presence of a cat.
Yeah.
What if the lighting's bad and it's actually a dog? And your thought that that's a cat is caused by a dog that exists. So that means that your thought must partake of the form of a cat that pre-exists your thought there,
right,
which then just presupposes reason.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and in then internalism is going to have the same issues that idealism has in the end.
Because he was calling it's the misrepresentation problem and the disjunction problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so with many of these issues, and I think he kind of says it in this book, if I remember, is that many of these issues that he's kind of covering, whether it's materialism, eliminativism, going along with idealism, and then with externalism and internalism, is that they're always, once you kind of reject Aristotelianism, you kind of are forced into some kind of dualism. And
yes,
so
that's...
And essentially that's everything that he's presenting here, is that you cannot escape dualism. And so either you're going to claim that these two are real, but then you can't marry the two because it said there is nothing connecting the two. And so then you're saying only one is real and the other one is illusory. And then you kind of are continuously going through this madness. And this madness manifests in this way.
So the misrepresentation of the disjunction is, the misrepresentation is that you're literally it's reiterating the point that Descartes made.
Yeah,
that your perceptions are unreliable. As a basis for thought. Or understanding or knowledge or belief or whatever. So the fact that the cat that I am perceiving and quote unquote know is there is caused by a dog means it's been misrepresented. But then another problem that was presented is the disjunction problem. Is that if my thought of a cat being there can be caused by a cat correctly, or a dog, means that it is represented by a disjunction of dog and cat. So why suppose that it's caused by cats at all?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Like, it's just like there's no why. What is a cat then?
Yes. Yeah.
If a dog and a cat in reality can manifest thoughts of cats in my head. And then Jerry Fodor again would have solved this by, it's called asymmetric dependence.
Right. Yeah.
You've known that?
Yeah, but you explained it.
This is very educational for me.
Yeah.
I feel like halfway through the episode I started understanding all of it better. Is that it's asymmetric dependence is that the fact that a dog at all can manifest thoughts of a cat, or cause, I keep saying we need to use the words right.
But
Cause the thought of cats in my head means that the dog causing the thought of a cat in my head is parasitic and depends on the experience of cats and knowledge of cats and the form of cats. And we're getting really, really close.
Yes.
To, it's essentially just like let me see. So Cartesian dualism, a theory presented 500 years ago, discounts this because your perceptions are not reliable. So we're back. Literally, we go back.
No, we do. Yeah.
And then he talks about Karl Popper.
Oh yeah.
What do you think of Karl Popper?
I don't like him too much.
What do you know of his thought?
I've read a lot of his philosophy of science books. Him and Thomas Kuhn as well.
Thomas Kuhn did the one that Joe likes?
Yes. Yeah.
So Karl, I would say that the argument presented by Popper in this context was accurate, and that say the causal, the both the externalists and internalists just kind of conceptualize an infinite chain of causes. But Popper says you have to pick a beginning point.
Right. Yeah.
And you can't in that framework.
No, you can't. Yeah. Unless you go back to the Russell just brute fact.
Yes.
Which is no real explanation.
It's so arbitrary.
Yeah.
It just sounds nice in his accent.
Yes. Yeah.
Brute fact. Yeah, and then Dennett. One of these guys.
He's actually one of the really contemporaries.
Dennis Dennett? No,
Daniel Dennett.
Daniel Dennett.
Yeah.
Is it Dennett?
That's how you pronounce it.
Okay, so the Australian lied to me.
Yeah, just say Dennett. A lot of people say Dennett too.
Okay, Daniel Dennett.
Yeah.
Would say something. Is he the one that had the homunculi thing?
Oh yeah.
This is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Of every argument.
He was one of the four horsemen of the non-apocalypse. Him, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and
oh really?
Yeah, and the last guy.
Is he one of the lesser known?
He is, yeah.
Okay.
But he's one of the most educated ones.
So he would say something. His comment on intentionality would be that intentionality exists only insofar as it is a tool of our use. It only exists insofar as I intend to use something.
Yeah.
Like insofar as we utilize it to.
Yeah, it goes back to like utilitarianism type of thing. But
which is weird to say that intentionality only exists insofar as it is intentional.
I really don't think he understood what intentionality meant.
But that's
in a philosophical sense.
I know, but is that not the argument?
No, it is.
Intentionality exists only insofar as it is intentional.
Yeah, it's like it's intentional use. Yeah.
This table only exists
as a table.
As a table, insofar as it is a table.
It's insofar that insofar that I intend to use it as a table.
Yeah, it just.
Yeah.
This table exists as a table insofar as I like that. But Dennett, his explanation, and I do not know how articulate Feser is in his explanation of this.
Yeah.
Dennett, sorry. They said it so many times. Daniel Dennett.
Unless he's being like Colbert and he's not actually pronouncing his name correctly. It could just be Dennett because he just looks like an Anglo.
Colbert?
Yeah. Colbert, Dennett. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise
Daniel
me.
Dennett. I'm going to say Dennett because now it's funny to me. One of the arguments that Feser presents for Dennett's argumentation that intentionality really just doesn't exist and is it's only something we refer to, or
because of
the
our
thing
utility,
we're referring to is just our utility.
Yeah.
He gives an example. So, because intentionality is obviously real.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
He posited an argument, and this is, again, I don't know how accurate Feser was in his, or how if he had synthesized this from Dennett, or if Dennett had literally said this, or whatever, that one would best understand intentionality as a hierarchy of homunculi existing in the brain or the mind.
Yeah.
And then that, and what is a homunculi? What is a homunculus?
Isn't a homunculi
Homunculus?
It was a created...
it's an automaton.
Yeah.
Like an organic automaton.
Yeah, that was made by like alchemists and shit.
Yeah, it's like a possessed...
Yeah.
It's like a proto-computer.
Yes, yeah.
In alchemical... sense. That intentionality is best understood by a hierarchy of homunculi that exists in a hierarchy of the highest ordered intentionality that is based on the work of another rung of homunculi with less intentionality until you get all the way to the bottom, and then the homunculi at the bottom are so stupid that they cannot be said to be thinking, and that's the basis for intentionality.
I don't know that specific arguments of
that's how Feser
right, but I'm assuming that he is probably poking fun at the idea of intentionality altogether.
Of course.
Yeah, because...
that literally has to... But then Feser, I think, poked fun at him, because obviously Feser has a thing against the new atheists.
Yes, I know, yeah.
We should cover the last superstition.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe later in the season, but I think he is poking fun at Dennett by seriously analyzing his argument.
I think so, yeah.
Because I was listening to this, and I was like, this is the stupidest thing.
I think it's just the way he's digging at him.
Okay, and then the next chapter, I love it. And they go... Or no... The next section, the Australian pauses and then goes, and then because that all of these, especially now, through the thought and intentionality part, he's literally just moving through the progression of thought. She just goes, eliminativism again.
That's like the name of a chapter.
That's the name of a section.
Yeah,
because. Then we're literally led to eliminative materialism.
Yes.
The Paul and...
Yeah, whatever. Paul and Pat Churchland. Yeah, Paul and Pat Churchland.
That they argue that materialist arguments cannot account for intentionality, and therefore materialists ought ultimately assume it doesn't exist at all because it cannot be explained by materialism.
Yes, yeah.
Which would be really easy if that was true.
Right, yeah.
If qualia, our experience of perception of sensory stimulus or whatever, cannot be explained materially, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yes, yeah.
Is that appealing to ignorance? What is that fallacy called?
Oh, just say that it doesn't exist?
Because you can't prove it.
They're not even saying that you can't
Shapiro
prove
does this all the time.
Yeah. Oh, does he? Yeah.
The appeal to ignorance, because something can't be justified.
Oh, right.
Yeah, what's the...
Yeah.
I don't know what that's called. You teach this. What is it called?
Yeah.
What's that?
No, that's appeal to ignorance if you're saying that there's something that cannot be proven, so you're...
You can't prove it in my framework, therefore...
Therefore it's ignorant. Yeah, so it's appeal to that.
Because I read this and then I was just like, okay, I want to understand this a little better. So I just looked at the Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
And literally the same example Feser gave is on the Wikipedia page at the beginning.
Is it really?
That the argument that eliminative materialists make in their assessment of philosophy of mind is that philosophy of mind per se is essentially outdated and that it will go by the way of Copernicus's Earth-centric model of the universe. That, in the same way, is it Copernicus that was that?
Who did the Earth-centered? I can't remember who did.
Whoever that is. So we have there's the heliocentric and the geocentric.
Yeah.
So that to an eliminative materialist would be analogous to the way in which our concept of there being belief, mind, thought, anything at all and immaterially.
Yeah.
Will be discarded in favor for a better and more accurate scientific theory.
Yeah.
The same way, and that means just eventually.
Yes, it does.
They're just like, oh, it'll happen eventually.
Yeah.
Their arguments are that it will happen eventually.
Yes, yeah. Even if they themselves don't have the arguments for why.
Eventually, we will just have these arguments.
Yeah.
That we can just describe our feelings to each other in.
Yes.
And just describe, well, they're not even feelings. They're not feelings. We can just describe the synapses in our brain to communicate our, not even mental states.
Yes, because there is no mind.
Our brain states.
Brains. Yeah, they're brain states.
Brain states.
Yeah.
Which refer to nothing.
Yeah.
That eventually we will just discard that in favor for a better, more scientific, that eventually science will just lead us to a material understanding of this eventually, and eventually we will just discard this. But not right now, but eventually.
Yes.
I think the most annoying thing to me about eliminative materialism and how they argue it especially is that it rejects the concept of belief. Therefore, they are not required to actually believe it.
Right, yeah.
To say it's true. They don't have to actually believe what they're saying.
Why? Because they
would just reject belief. If you reject that belief is real at all, you don't have to believe anything you're saying.
Yes, that's true.
There is no belief. You're just making sounds.
Yes, yeah. There's no meaning in it.
At all.
Yeah. But they want to claim it as meaningful.
Yes, because it presupposes belief.
Yes.
To say that is true means you believe it's true.
Yes, I know.
Which then, therefore...
No, it's an absurd position.
Requires rationality, which requires a mind. So...
And in the end, that position is the mainstream position for most academic psychologists, is this like a materialist point of view.
Yeah. So, do you know what quadition is? What?
Yeah.
It's a Kripkean thing?
Yeah.
Is this bad and dumb to you?
It's just a kind of a funny example. He's such an autistic bastard. Yes. So
Can we recommend that listeners go listen? So listeners, really quick, go and search on YouTube Saul Kripke lecture.
Yeah.
Kripke. Saul Kripke.
Yeah.
He has the most. If people think that Slavoj Žižek is funny sounding and weird, Kripke's like literally.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I was working at the camera store with you.
Yeah, yeah.
And you were like, "Oh, look at this," and I did not believe it was real. At all. I do not. I still have a hard time believing the speaking voice is real.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was saying, I mean, it's just a made-up mathematical thing. And so it's kind of one of the arguments that I use, but I never call it quadition.
Well, do you object to the Kripkenstein term that people sometimes use to refer
This
to
is the
your
interviewer.
interpretation? This is denial.
Oh my God, it's an interviewer. Just let him lecture. No. Sorry, I tried to be cool. Oh, here we go. This is a lecture.
Fight natural sex, Oliver said, when a set of matches is thrown on the floor, can say at a glance. It's not so big, but none of us could do this, right?
Anyway, go try to just if any listener can get through a lecture by Saul Kripke, we'll give you a prize. Anyway, so quadition.
Oh man, he's a genius. Like his IQ, his IQs are just like it's off the. But
he's such a genius that everything about him has to be ugly. Yes, that he is not allowed to partake of God in any other way.
Oh my gosh. So
he would be God if he was beautiful.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so when you have mathematics, so you have this.
I like that the Dutch interview the interviewer sounded exactly
as bad. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
So you have this process of addition that we all have done before, right? And so in order for us to do addition, there are certain principles in which we follow in order to do addition.
You don't want it?
I do.
You gotta drink it now. Anyway.
And so in order for you to do mathematics, you have to kind of presuppose certain principles of value and quantity, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like an example of quadition, because he doesn't really tell you exactly what quadition is,
but gives you examples of it.
Yeah, but he just says you're just doing something different. So an example that I normally give a quadition is like if you have 2 plus 2, and in your mind you think that 2 plus 2 equals 22 because you're adding the two symbols together.
Mm-hmm. That's quadition.
That's an example of somebody just doing something else that's not addition. So quadition is like something that's not addition. And so when you do addition, there's a certain structure that you're following that the symbol that we have for 2 references a quantity that's greater than 1 and less than 3. And so when you add that which is greater than 1 and less than 3 plus another one that is greater than 1 and less than 3, you get something that is greater than 3 but less than 5. And so then we have a symbol.
In integers.
Yes.
Without decimal points.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's how we get the quantity 4 for that conclusion. But let's say I'm doing quadition, I could have different rules in which I could play that is equally as valid. And so if I say that these symbols refer to an object within themselves as opposed to refer to quantity outside of itself, that this plus sign that I see, I am fusing these two symbols together. And so when I see the value of 2 and I'm adding 2 to 2, I'm actually fusing the symbols together, which means 22. Now, there's no way for you to tell me that is wrong, because it
depends on what you're trying to do.
It depends on what I'm trying to do, right? Yeah. And so what he's saying is that imagine that your entire life was doing quadition rather than addition, and you thought that you were doing addition. And so if you thought you were doing addition, but yet you were doing this other activity of quadition, that there will be no way that you can materially display that what you are doing is actually addition or quadition, because all you can measure are the synapses of your brain doing a certain activity. And doing a certain activity, you have to presuppose that addition exists, or you have to presuppose that quadition exists in order for you to measure the synapses of the brain in order to know exactly what you're doing.
This is like an argument they made earlier, is that in a material framework, like for language to exist at all and how it functions, it must exist somewhere if the world is material.
Yes.
It must be somewhere physically in the brain that you can see.
Yeah. So Kripke is arguing against like the materialist worldview.
Yeah. He's obviously not a materialist.
Yeah, he's not. Yeah.
He's a weird one because most of his work is in lectures and privately circulated manuscripts and stuff.
Yes, he doesn't really. He never really written like a book. He just talks and it gets recorded and then it's typed out. He doesn't type it himself.
I don't know if he could. I don't know if he can use his hands right. Like, he might not even feed himself. Like,
Probably
just
not.
the way that he talks. Because you can look at him and you're like, okay, he's fine. But, like, I don't think...
He even looks where he's, like, squinting the whole time. It's like...
Well, I think that he's
when people are introducing him...
He's literally the most autistic person I've ever seen.
At least one that's functioning in the world.
But he's, like, so smart.
I know, that's what I mean. That's functioning successfully in the world. Like,
It's so crazy.
I think they discovered him when he was, like, 10 years old.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and then they skipped all these grades to send him directly to the university, and he was going to be majored in mathematics first.
Audition. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what they all wanted him to be in. And then he encountered philosophy. And
and they were like, no!
Yes, they all hated it. He ditched it. He was like, I'm not doing this. I want to do philosophy.
He's like, that is dumb.
Yep.
Quadition. They're like shaking their fists in the air. That's awesome. And then after this point, the section is, I was telling you, I texted you this earlier today when I was kind of finishing this up, but
yeah.
After the dualist arguments and the material arguments and the combat Feser subjected both to regarding thought and intentionality and all this stuff, I was just like it was getting to such an absurd degree. There was nothing in which there was no reference point I could use to navigate any of it.
Yeah.
And then the Australian lady stops. I'm like, new section. She goes, materialism, meaning, and metaphysics. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
like my eyes rolled back in my head, and I was like, okay, this is fine. So he literally says contemporary arguments in philosophy of mind are mostly recapitulations of Aristotelian and Platonic arguments that happened 2,500 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And then objections and arguments concerning intentionality, qualia, etc., are just recapitulations and reformulations of things said 2,500 years ago. And I was like, ah. And then he makes a point that, or he says that one might make the point that it is only by an inquiry other than like a scientific / physics-based one that one can properly understand the mind.
Yeah.
And then he goes, chapter 8, persons, and goes right back. I'm like, no. He starts talking about what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
In terms of all these other arguments.
Yeah.
And then I was sad again. And it was right back in the trenches.
No, yeah, I have to go back into it.
Because, he starts talking, which I think is interesting. I think it's one of the conversations you and I had really, really early on in our knowing each other. Is how can one say that there is any persistence in your personhood as over the course of your life you go through so many physiological personality changes, like physiological change, personality change, character change, thought change, etc. How can you say that your nature as a person persists at all? Are you the same person you were yesterday? Are you the same person you were when you were 10?
Yeah, and I think from a strictly materialist point of view, it gets even worse because I believe it's every 7 years that all of your cells have already died and reproduced to new cells. And so the cells that you have in your body right now is not the same as it was 7 years ago. And so you could break yourself down to the smallest parts and it's constantly changing, it's constantly renewing. And so how can you say from a material point of view that you are actually still the same person? What does it mean to be a person?
Because he does use the example of Ethel, someone named Ethel. That's the only name I remember. It was Ethel. I thought that was a weird name to use. She is randomly a 90-year-old you're talking about. Everybody else was like Frank and
Ethel and her
John,
friend Deborah.
And you're like Ethel and Phyllis. Ethel, Phyllis, and Phyllis's husband Maynard all want to go. Dick. Ethel's husband is Dick.
Myron.
Byron. Myron and Byron are twins. Anyway,
somebody listening is like, hey, that's my name. Fucking assholes.
I'm 22 and my mom named me Byron.
Byron, my brother's name is Myron. He's only 4 years old.
What is it? All all characters are a work of fiction and are not reflective of anyone in the whatever the message they have to put on.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
Like
in the Disney movies now?
Law and Order SVU, they're like, hey, if this reflects your life, this is a work of fiction.
Yeah.
All characters are fictional. Anyway, the example I give is like Ethel, who's 90, gets in a machine, and her body and mind are copied by the machine and then destroyed, and then that information is sent to Mars.
Yes, yeah.
And then a machine on Mars then takes that information and reconstructs a body, quote unquote, identical to the body.
And transfers the mind.
Yeah,
the information.
like so you're the same. Are you the same person?
Yeah.
And Feser, I think, saying without saying, it says you can't say that's an identical body because they occupy different
right. Yes.
space.
Yeah.
So you're not the same. It's not identical.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what is that the same person or not?
Right. Yeah.
Is the question.
Yeah. Even if they both don't exist at the same time, but I think like a lot of theories for what is that called when you could instantly locate to somewhere else? I know it doesn't exist. Yeah, teleportation. Like a lot of the theories that quantum physicists talk about teleportation is that in order to teleport, it has to break your entire body down into its subatomic particles and then destroy it and reproduce it in another location. And it says that's really the only theoretical way that teleportation can work.
But how does it account for the mind?
Right. How does it account for a mind? But also, if everything was destroyed, is that you? Like if they destroyed every single molecule of you and then they put you somewhere else and they reconstructed it through the process of the electrons reproducing and everything. Yeah. It's like, but is that you or did you die? Like if you literally destroyed everything in your body, were you dead and now you're reborn in a new?
And how does
body?
the mind?
And how does the mind work and all that? Right.
Transfer. Yeah. How do you transfer a mind?
Yeah.
Which sounds very dualist.
It does.
It's a very dualist concept.
Yes.
Whether or not they want to say that.
Right. Yeah.
But he just kind of goes. He's just like, is it the continuity of the body that makes you the same person? Is it the continuity of your psychology or your mind that makes you the same person? Like, which is the relationship between the two? Like, what makes you the same person? And then she pauses, and then there's the consequence of mechanism section.
Yeah.
Which is essentially, what consequence could the mechanisms of the body have in your personhood?
Yes, yeah.
That like the way in which your brain seems to act like a computer, like what does that mean about the fact that you're a person or not?
Yeah.
And then she pauses again, and then she just goes, Hylomorphism, and then I cry.
Like he waits till the really end to talk about it.
I know. I literally, it felt like mentally felt like I was coming back from war. It's like, oh my God.
Taking a journey through all these
I know. I've seen so many guys get their heads blown off, and now I'm home and my mom's here.
Yeah.
And then every single thing he said made sense.
Yes.
Every single thing was like, oh, great. Yes.
Yeah.
So, you should explain hylomorphism.
Hylomorphism?
Just explain it.
Oh, so hylomorphism is that there's one substance and then one substance is made
Hylomorphism is form and matter.
Yeah, form. Yeah, is that you have form and matter?
Hylomorphism.
Yeah.
I know, but is it HYL only means form? There's
and morph. Yeah,
and then morph means matter.
Yeah.
So like trans. What's a word with more? I mean. Metamorphosis is you like changing matter.
Right, yeah.
I'm just trying to think of other
Mighty
words.
Morphin Power Rangers.
Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. They're strong.
Yes.
They're made of matter. And
there's
power
a white one and there's a pink one.
Mighty morphing. So what does it mean to... That almost makes me think that the word morph is just like half a word that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You're morphing. You are subsisting of matter. You're consistent. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
These are very nerdy jokes. I haven't made a single killing a 4-year-old and eating her face joke
I know.
for a long time. Anyway, that's the ethics conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And so then with hylomorphism, it's not really dualism because you're not saying that there's two independent realities. There's not the immaterial substance and the material substance that have to be united.
There's only, that there is the material and the immaterial.
Yes, but there's only one substance, and that they cannot exist independent from one another.
Because what like this table exists hylomorphically in that it consists of the matter it does.
Yes.
But it also partakes of the form table.
Yeah.
And it has to do both.
Yeah.
To be a table.
And one way to think about it, if one wants to think of it like the discoveries that we have done within modern sciences, for example, Aristotle, the way he described it earlier was that prime matter does not exist. There is no such thing as matter that is formless. There is no formless matter. It isn't as if you're going to look through the world and someday you're going to discover.
Is that what dark matter is? No.
No, dark matter is like antimatter, but we don't have to get into that.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
That sounds stupid.
Yes. And it's like a void.
It's real evil.
Yes, yeah. But and so the more that scientifically we've broken things apart, the more you've gotten down to the smaller particles, the more we've seen that it's mostly made of empty space. And that's because you can never.
And he makes appeals to that fact a lot.
Yes,
this table, like if you go down, if you break it down into its smallest parts and observe them visually, it consists of empty space.
It does, and then you go all the way down to the mathematical equations of quantum mechanics. You go down to a place in which the electrons, it is literally nowhere. And
actually, I had this. This is kind of unrelated. I don't even know where I would have written this in my notes, but that the fact that we know that this table is made of what we call atoms, which we think consist of mostly negative space.
Yes, subatomic particles.
Why do I need to know that?
It's just because they were trying to.
No, I understand, but like, what about that information? Like, they teach this to everybody.
They do.
They teach this many times through like public school. And if you're in a public school, you're going to learn this over and over in different grades.
Yes, yeah.
Why do I need to know that?
Yeah.
I'm not going to make an atom bomb.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could, but yeah.
Like, I don't. And I didn't mean that from a utility argument. I don't know why that's not necessary.
Yeah. I think the only thing that is helpful in a grasping of understanding reality is that prime matter does not exist. At the end of the day,
it's just negative space.
Yes, is that you can never really.
Oh, so you could use it as a tool to learn the right thing, but they don't do that.
Yeah, they don't. Oh, okay, yes, okay. Yeah. And so that's what Aristotle says.
So there is no reason why they teach you that.
For them, I think
it's just a masturbatory. Look what we found thing.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And so for and so for Aristotle, he said that you can, the more that you try to take something apart, the more you will see that there is nothing there.
And the fact that he said that 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
And when did we first see an atom? In like the 20s or something?
Yeah,
we weren't building an atom.
Yeah, we've never actually physically seen an atom, but we theorized about an atom until I think the late 1800s, early 1900s.
We didn't really do much with it until.
No, yeah. I mean, even the splitting of the atom is a theoretical split, and
we don't know that that's what's causing it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really understand what it means because an atom is a zero-dimensional object, and so it isn't as if it has any dimensions.
It's amazing to me that Aristotle literally said that 2,200 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
Give or take 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Like before 300 years before Christ, Aristotle said if you break things down physically, you will eventually find nothing.
You find nothing, yes. Because matter cannot exist without form. Because even an atom has a form. Even a subatomic particle has a form. Even quantum physics has a form of mathematics.
Well, because eventually
everything has form.
Well, it's like if I'm going to break this table down into smaller pieces and smaller pieces and smaller pieces and smaller pieces, because it exists as a hylomorphic union between form and matter. Eventually, you will have to split those apart to keep going.
Yes, and then that's when
because
you see
then
nothing.
You are splitting matter and form.
Yes, and then that's the point where you see nothing.
Because there is nothing.
There's nothing there. Yes, yeah. And the same thing is with form for Aristotle. You cannot have form without matter.
That's so interesting.
You can't have a form not forming something. But we also are aware that that because of that they exist united to to become what is a substance, and that's all that it is. And so form and matter exists holomorphically in every substance that we see, and that we cannot talk about these things as being independent. And so the reason why when somebody talks about the brain and its reaction to ideas and everything, the reason why it sounds a lot true is because a lot of it is true. When somebody talks about idealism and there's realities that is immaterial and that we somehow interact with the world, that we're instantiating its purpose and whatnot, it's because that's true. And the reason is because we're not just matter and we're not just form, we're both. And because we're both form and matter.
It's a false dichotomy.
Yes, that there is no dualism, there's just monism. And so with monism, we cannot eradicate the brain if we're going to talk about the mind. But we also cannot eradicate the mind if we're going to talk about the brain.
What kind of amazed me, or not amazed me, just kind of came to me as I was listening to him talk about hylomorphism, and he alluded to it, was the fact that the mind-body problem is such a heated debate in philosophy at all is because you just reject hylomorphism, because hylomorphism explains it from the very beginning.
Yes, it does,
It answers the mind-body problem immediately and then moves on from there.
The reason why there was no mind-body problem for 1,500 years was because of the solution presented by Aristotle. And because
that problem was done.
Yes.
And then
it's the same thing with the problem of change, in which if we want to cover that, that's also a problem that happened in the modern world. Like, we have an issue with change. What does it mean?
Everything in this episode we just said was useless banter between different thinkers since Descartes. Trying to solve an issue. That Aristotle solved. 2,200 years ago.
Did you just imagine?
Surprise!
Just imagine being someone like me who went through college and then grad school, and investing thousands of dollars and many years and hours of reading a lot of shit, only to realize, all of this wealth of knowledge that I have is bullshit, because it was already solved.
Okay, so
a long time
we're
ago.
saving people money now. I was curious. And again, we can do a whole episode on hylomorphism. We do a whole. This is literally.
Which we should.
We
could.
We're 3.5 hours in, but
I know not today, but I mean we could cover like De Anima by Aristotle. It's a really good text.
That'd be good. We're not quite done. There's a few more things that I think would be worth talking about, but this is an introductory text.
Yes.
To shotgun as much of as many views of the issue as possible. It's not necessarily a. You can tell he's partial. To Thomism and Aristotelianism.
Because it's the way that Aristotelianism. What I like is that he at least saves it till the end.
Yes.
And he
gotchas at the end.
Yes,
He does it tastefully, and he doesn't do it with.
It's not with malice. It's just that he presents all these theories. He immerses himself in them accurately.
He's like, but we need to think about this one again.
Yes.
And the other interesting thing about hylomorphism is it posits more forms of cause than just efficient and substantial material.
Yep. Yeah, the four causes, basically. Yeah. You have the material, you have the formal, you have the efficient, and then the final.
What can we say? So, actually, really quickly, what is Thomistic dualism?
Is Aristotelian.
Because people go like, "Oh, dualism's dumb." It's like, well, and then I was like, "Oh, wait, Aquinas has its own dualism."
Yes, and so the main difference is that there's a certain line in De Anima in which Aristotle argues. Okay, so I have to present this argument the best way that I can.
Yes.
So, with the hylomorphic worldview, you have this dependence between the form and matter that they cannot exist apart from one another. But Aristotle argues that with every other interaction of the psyche, of the soul, we probably should cover that later, but for the sake of this argument, let's just call it the psyche so people don't get spooky about the plasma invisible
I will
person.
say really quick, I know this is an extremely dense and what's the word? Possibly difficult to follow first episode of a season.
Yeah.
But we're trying to cover as much as we can to establish what we're doing.
Yes.
And then move into specifics over the course of the season.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so with that, with the powers of the psyche, all of our activities deteriorate the more that we interact with it. And so an example of this...
our activities?
Yeah, activities. And so when you think of the psyche, when Aristotle talks about the psyche, when Thomas talks about the psyche and everything, they're not referring to the brain and whether they're referring to the animating principles of what makes you animated. Right? And so there's certain powers that the psyche has. There's the vegetative power.
Well, that's what psychology originally referred to.
It did, yeah. Psychology, until the 20th century, just referred to philosophy of mind. Yeah. And so you have the psyche, and so like a vegetative part of the power of the psyche is one that eats, and stuff of the reproductive part.
It's the nutritive soul.
Yes, the nutritive soul, yep. And then you have the reproductive one, the locomotion one, and so on and so forth.
The sensory soul.
The sensory soul, right?
Yeah.
And so he takes a sensory soul in this way. So in the sensory psyche, the thing about the sensory psyche is that whenever you experience a sensation, it deteriorates the more you experience it. And so many of us have experiences before. So when you go to a concert, for example.
Yeah.
And when you first go there, the music sounds super, super loud. Right? And then they start playing. And so let's say they start banging out a song that's fucking, it's tremendous, right? There's a lot of drums, there's a lot of guitar.
Melting,
yes, it's a face melting one.
Teeth kicking, yeah.
Right, yeah. You start becoming more hard of hearing. Right? Because the more senses you get, the more it deteriorates. It isn't as if the more sound you get, the louder it gets.
Well, so if you start eating spicy food,
you get
the
desensitized.
longer you eat it, you'll be desensitized.
Yes, you get desensitized. And this is true about all of our other powers that we have.
If you go outside in the sun and then you walk into a dark room,
yes,
you're
exactly.
desensitized to light.
Yeah. And there's modern laws like Weber's law that talks about that. And so Weber's law says that increments and changes of sensation become less potent the greater the magnitude is. And so let's say if you're working out, for example, the first time, and you first start lifting 25 pounds for curling, and then you just move up 10 pounds to 35 pounds, it actually feels like a tremendous move. And let's say you've been working out for a long time, and then you go from 100 pounds to 110 pounds, it is very, very, the magnitude of distinction is very minimal. Same thing with audio, right? So the first time you turn on the radio in your car in the morning, let's say there's an audio level of 100, from 1 to 100, you probably have it like a 10. And it's loud for that time. You drive a little bit more. You hear a song you really like. You crank it up a little bit more, and you crank it up 10 volumes. You go up to 20. There's a magnitude of difference. So let's say now it's towards the end of the day. You're already blasting your radio up at 60 volume, and then you crank it up to 70. There's not that much difference. Like you have to crank it up to fucking 100 to really start feeling that boom. And so all of the powers of the psyche, all the powers of the soul, always deteriorate the more of that sensation you get.
Is it almost to match it?
It is almost to match it, but it's just something he observes. He says everything always comes out that way. But what is one of the powers of the soul that doesn't do that? He says the intellect. And
by soul you mean the formal reality?
Yes, the formal reality of the mind, of the psyche, of the person. And so the intellect, the more you learn, actually the more you know. It isn't as if the more information you get, the more you deteriorate in knowledge. In fact, the more you grow in knowledge. And so you could be pumping yourself with more and more knowledge, and you're just going to keep growing. You're going to keep growing. You keep growing. And so because of this, Aristotle, it wasn't just Aquinas, but Aristotle theorized that the intellect is the only attribute of the psyche, of the soul, that is not dependent on the body. And so the intellect is, then this is where Aristotle says, this is why we are different from animals, because we are intelligent animals, we're rational animals. And because this power of the psyche is not beast-like, it is not like the sensation.
Why could he prove that?
Because he says that it is the only power that does not deteriorate.
I know, but how can you say, how do we know that, like, my dog isn't intelligent? How do we know that? Just based on observation?
Yeah,
or?
that would just be based on observation. Yeah, because obviously...
So it's inductive. He could be intelligent.
He would say if he was, then he would be able to speak to you to some degree.
Well, what if I just don't know that he's not talking to me? What if I...
Anybody that has reason will be able to at least articulate things.
If he's just not, is what I mean. Like...
That every dog in existence is not doing it?
Yeah, like, what? Yeah, sure.
I mean...
Why is that not an inductive argument? We just haven't seen a dog talk.
It's because it isn't so much that they're not willing to talk. It's obvious that they're unable to.
Through observation.
Yeah,
we can't deduce that they don't talk. They can't talk.
Oh, yeah, you can deduce that.
That's what I mean. It's we have such an overwhelming body of evidence to assume that they're
not assume, but conclude. You can infer that in the end. You could say that's a strong conclusion because induction...
Very, 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 very probably they can't talk.
Yes, yeah. But
it's not certain that they can't talk. There's no reason to believe that they can't talk.
Yes, there's no reason to believe that they can talk, yeah. But yes, it's not going to be a deductive argument.
It's about as strong an inductive argument as you can make.
Yes, like it's like a DNA argument. Yeah. It's like is there a like if you ever look at the actual evidence that they say they normally say it is 0.000002% chance that this DNA matches somebody else. It's like, so there's a possibility. I was like, okay, yeah, there is, but
but it still is inductive.
Yeah, anyway. But it's inductive.
I'm just trying to. Someone might go, "Oh, how do you know that?" So
yes, and so because of that, he says because it doesn't deteriorate with your body the way the other senses do. Like your brain helps you articulate ideas, and so your articulation of the ideas will deteriorate the older you get, but the ideas themselves never do. Mm-hmm. It's like we just keep growing and keep growing. Okay,
so actually what I just did is I did the thing, the Occam's razor thing. You're like, okay, so the explanation. So you're going to try to explain that dogs just never talked. Explain that as simply as I've reached my conclusion.
Yes, yeah.
It would take a lot more energy to explain that dogs can talk, they just never have.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Just to assume. Okay.
Yeah, and so Aquinas takes this and says, then it is the intellect, it is the intellective power of the human, the rational power of the human,
feature of human,
that is not dependent on the body. And so since it is not dependent on the body, it's not solely
then
dependent on the body.
Then when a person dies,
it isn't so much that it floats off, because in a Catholic faith you get a new body, but that it can be transferred.
That which persists.
Yeah, that which persists would be the intellect. That the intellect has no finitude. There is no finite intellect. The intellect is infinite.
But literally everything else is finite.
Yes, yeah. And so that is Thomistic dualism.
And that's not to say that the intellect is any simple, small feature of the...
No, that's going to take much more discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. But he takes that from an Aristotelian argument. It isn't solely a Thomistic argument.
Yeah. Well, many of his arguments are Aristotelian, but I just thought it was interesting that he... I'd never heard of Thomistic dualism before.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought all dualism was bad.
Yeah.
That is essentially, and then he just kind of elaborates on how philosophy of mind.
Yeah.
You can extrapolate from philosophy of mind.
Yes.
Into ethics, epistemology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is essentially like ontology and philosophy of mind are the two.
Yes, so they're the two basic principles, and everything else kind of stems from them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
He does that was chapter 8, persons.
Yeah.
And then there is a chapter 9 in a version. So it came out in 2005, and like a year or two later, there's another version with a postscript where he wanted to elaborate, I guess he wished that he had said things he didn't say to clarify in there.
Yeah.
That thinks he didn't do enough in the original text to clarify that Cartesian dualism and materialism are totally unequal in their approaches. That like Cartesian dualism isn't a scientific theory.
Right, yeah, it isn't.
And that materialism is.
Yes, yeah.
Most materialism is.
Well, at least science the way we understand it now to be, yeah.
It's like you can't like the thing that he said, like, if the mind isn't material, then you require some system of inquiry that is not scientific / physical to inquire regarding it. Like, you can't use, like, so that was one thing. I have a collection of, I should go through that collection of Aquinas I have and see if there's anything kind of relevant. There's some, it's like it's like this big, and there's like, some of them are like sermons, and I'm like, I don't want to, literally every third word is a reference, a Bible reference.
Oh yeah,
like, I can't read this. Yeah. Like this,
he is
I just can't. This is not.
He is known to have the entire
Bible memorized.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is, yeah.
Just like reading it is like, just like, it's like there's so many Bible references in parentheses in it, you almost can't read it. It's almost not sentences.
Yeah.
And I mean that literally. Like, I was trying to read it and I was like, I'm not comprehending this because it's referencing something else so frequently that I can't.
It's definitely one of the best
articulations
of the Bible
ever
made.
His sermons.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I could try getting through them now because I really haven't tried reading it in like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Whenever we started reading this was probably around the time I was trying to read it, August 2020 or something. But in the introduction, the person who wrote the introduction to the thing to kind of explain why the thing was put together the way it was, they explained metaphysics, mathematics, and physics. Or mathematics, physics, and metaphysics. Yeah. The way to understand these three and their relationship to each other is that mathematics has quantified being as a subject. So it's like, how many things?
Yes, yeah.
How do those how many things interact with other how many things? It's like this quantities and stuff. Physics has being a subject, change as a subject. So it's how does one thing change over time into this thing? Yeah. Or how does it physically change in observing that? Yeah. And then metaphysics has being as such as its subject.
Yes, yeah.
So metaphysics, so when you're talking about the mind, if the mind is not material, if the mind were material, you could observe it scientifically because you could deduce whatever truth about it you needed to based on how it changed over time observably. Yeah. But if it's not material, then you need it's obviously, mathematics is irrelevant because mathematics is just quantities.
Right, yeah.
And the mind is, you can't just understand the mind fully by way of quantities.
Yeah.
Because it's not, it makes no sense. But if it's not material, you can't use science as we understand it now. Yeah. Or physics as they would have called it.
Yeah.
For most of history. So you need metaphysics because metaphysics concerns everything that is immaterial, meaning that it doesn't partake of a being in a substantial way. I don't know exactly how you'd word that, but
well, especially when you talk about holomorphic beings, because it isn't as if the mind is not material. It's not merely material. It is not merely immaterial. And so the human mind is both, because we're not angels. Yeah. And so as Aquinas would say, it would be like, if you start talking about immaterial minds, you're talking about angels. You're not talking about people anymore. Yeah. And that's a different subject that we would have to get into. But
yeah, I think you specifically said you wanted to do an episode on angels at one point. Yeah. The last point that he makes, which is really funny because you can hear the echoes of it. Well, what's the word? I'm trying to think. I have to pee, so we're going to be done soon. But, you can hear the extremely amplified and expanded echoes of this in The Last Superstition, which he wrote later.
Yes, he did, by
quite a lot.
Yeah.
That was like 2010 or something.
Yep, I think 2009 or 2010, something around there.
But he says, materialists, one of the things he wishes she's getting tired. Okay. One second. I'm almost done. That materialists tend to monopolize fantastical explanations for things, that they can talk about what it might be like to be present and see the formation of a black hole, even though that would be possible.
Yeah.
Because if you're near a black hole when it forms, you've dead long ago.
Yeah.
But then when like a Cartesian dualist wants to talk about but what if there's a demon or whatever?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, that's dumb.
Yeah.
You're like, you just talked about seeing a black hole in person. Anyway, do you have anything else to say? Is that a weird way to end that?
No, it's good.
Hylomorphism is good. The rest of it's bad.
Yeah.
And we'll elaborate later.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to season 3. Bye.
Bye.